3 Cadillac Escalades, black and glossy like crude oil, glided onto Park Avenue beneath the October drizzle. They came to rest in a perfect line before the Sterling Tower. The middle door opened. A man in a black suit stepped out. Raindrops touched his shoulders and slipped away, as if they didn't dare to cling. He lifted his eyes to the 58th floor. He did not hurry. Men like him had never known the meaning of haste. Inside Manhattan's highest rooftop restaurant, a 28-year-old waitress was trembling, holding a shattered silver bird in the palm of her hand. On her cheek remained a streak of crimson, the sharp fingerprint of the woman who had just slapped her. All because she dared to bring a bowl of soup to a homeless old lady. She did not know who the man stepping into the elevator was. She did not know who the old woman in the worn brown wool coat was. She did not know that within the next 18 minutes, her life and the lives of 3 strangers with no ties to one another would never be the same again. If this story moves you, tap the like button. It means more to us than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because every week we bring you a story that makes you believe in humanity again. 3 hours earlier, while Manhattan was still wrapped in the gray coat of an October afternoon, 3 people who had never met were moving in 3 different directions. But fate had already begun to stitch the thread. On the R train coming in from Astoria toward Midtown Manhattan, Meredith Holloway sat in the corner seat at the end of the car, her head resting lightly against the metal pole that had been cold since morning. She was 28 years old, slender, with chestnut brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. In her headphones, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major drifted steadily, like the breathing of someone trying not to come apart. On her lap lay a worn brown leather notebook. She opened it, took out a pen, and added one more line. Arlene, about 52, Vernon Corner, likes weak coffee, no sugar, said she used to be a piano teacher in Cleveland. She closed the notebook and placed her hand over the silver sparrow pendant at her throat. Her thumb rubbed softly over the metal surface that had gone smooth from 3 years of being touched every day. The train swayed gently through a curve. The fluorescent lights flickered twice. She closed her eyes and let Chopin carry her. At that same moment, 200 meters above the ground, in a large office on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower, Cillian Braxton sat behind a black oak desk. On the desk were only 2 things: an ivory silk handkerchief gone yellow with age, embroidered with the letter F in faded gold thread, and a black and white photograph of a man in his 40s, smiling in the middle of a theater. He was 33 years old, wearing a white shirt with a loosened black tie, his right hand gripping the handkerchief so tightly that the tendons stood out along his wrist. The faint scar running along the left side of his chin twitched once, then went still. 20 years. For 20 years, he had hired people to search every inch of the 5 boroughs, had offered sums large enough to buy an entire building in Brooklyn, had called men who no longer wanted to take calls from the Braxtons. 20 years, and not a single trace. He slipped the handkerchief into his breast pocket, close to his heart. He looked at his father's photograph one last time, then turned his chair toward the window and stared down at Park Avenue, wet with misting rain. Somewhere else in the city, inside a dark ground-floor apartment in Red Hook, Brooklyn, a graying man sat in front of 3 computer screens. The curtains were drawn shut. The only light in the room was the pale blue glow from a map of Manhattan displayed on the center monitor. A tiny red dot was moving slowly across the city blocks, stopping somewhere between 5th Avenue and 57th Street. He leaned back in his chair, took out an old silver lighter, flicked it on and off, on and off. He smiled to himself, his voice low and dry like wood splitting in winter. It's been 20 years, Finnegan. She's finally willing to step out of the shadows. Thanks to your good son for pulling her out for me. He tapped 2 fingers against the desk, counting 10 beats in silence, then lifted his phone to his ear. Get ready. Tonight we settle the old debt. Meredith's train pulled into Lexington. The doors opened. She stepped out with the crowd, Chopin still playing its final passage through her headphones. Meanwhile, Cillian rose from his chair, put on his suit jacket, and walked out of his office without knowing that a few floors below him, a corner table at Celestine had just been dusted off by someone. Across the city, the graying man shut down all 3 screens, swung a brown leather jacket over his shoulders, and walked out of the dark apartment. 3 people who didn't know one another, standing at 3 different points on the map of New York, were moving toward the same destination. Meredith stepped through the back entrance of Celestine at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, as she had every Friday for the past 8 months. The scent of brown butter and thyme drifted out from the kitchen, so familiar that she could have closed her eyes and still known which dish was being finished over the large stove. Rafael Cortez stood beside the walk-in cooler, 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with a long scar running from his wrist to his elbow, one of the remnants of his years in the Navy. He didn't say anything when he saw her. He simply set a light brown paper box on the wooden cutting board, beside it 2 slices of still warm buttered bread wrapped in cloth. She nodded. He nodded back. That was the entirety of their conversation each week, an agreement that needed no signature and no promise. Only 2 nods at 4:30 in the afternoon. She picked up the soup box, slipped past the back door, and went down the stairwell to the street. The October wind cut into the thin collar of her coat. She walked straight to the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street, to Eileen's usual place beside the closed metal shutter of a watch shop. The spot was empty. There was no plaid scarf, no canvas bag embroidered with the letters E, Ode, no small fragile figure, only a damp piece of cardboard lying face up on the sidewalk. She stood still for a few seconds. Then she walked another block toward the park, glanced down a narrow alley, and looked under the church overhang nearby. A woman selling newspapers on the sidewalk saw her and shook her head before Meredith could even ask. The police cleared out the whole area around midday, sweetheart. There was a charity parade coming through. They escorted some of the homeless folks onto buses, headed back to a shelter in the Bronx. Meredith thanked her, turned away, and walked a little farther. She looked across the avenue. Nothing. She looked down toward a subway vent where Eileen had once told her she sat on the coldest days. Nothing. Her hand tightened around the soup box until both thumbs pressed dense into the paper. The old woman was 72 years old and hadn't eaten anything in at least 2 days. Meredith knew that from last week's conversation, when Eileen had joked that her scarf kept getting looser, as if it wanted to slip away from her too. If they had put her on a bus to the Bronx, she wouldn't be able to get back to this part of the city for at least a week. If they hadn't managed to get her onto the bus, she could be sitting in some forgotten corner of Manhattan. Meredith hadn't thought to check. If night fell and no one gave her a meal. If, those ifs piled up in Meredith's chest like small stones. She looked at her watch. 4:52. Her shift started at 5. She had to go back. She returned to Celestine, to the back door, the stairwell, the kitchen. The soup box was still warm in her hands. Raphael looked up when she came in, and with one glance at her face, he understood. He didn't ask. He only opened the warming cabinet and made room for her to place the soup inside. Even after she set it down and pulled her hand away, she stood there for another second, as though she still hoped that if she waited just a little longer, the kitchen door would open, and Eileen would walk in with that familiar, trembling smile. But the door didn't open. She turned away, went into the staff changing room, tied on her black apron, pinned her name tag to her chest, and tucked 2 loose strands of hair behind her ears. In the mirror, she saw a young woman trying to force something back down her throat. She drew in a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped out into the main dining room of Celestine. While Meredith was tying her apron in front of the mirror in the staff changing room, not far away, Eileen O'Donnell was taking slow, fragile steps along the sidewalk on 5th Avenue. She was 72 years old, about 5 feet 1 tall, drawn inward inside a worn brown wool coat, with a plaid scarf wrapped twice around her neck, and still not enough to keep out the wind. The canvas bag embroidered with the letters E. Ode hanging from her shoulder was almost completely empty now, holding only an old Bible, a veteran's badge that had belonged to her late husband, and a crumpled black-and-white photograph she never took out in front of anyone. The police had herded her and the others onto buses shortly after 1 o'clock that afternoon. She had slipped away into a subway entrance, sat there for nearly 2 hours, waited for the crowd to thin, and then crept back out. Now she no longer knew which direction she was walking in. After 3 days without a proper meal, her legs felt as though they were dragging 2 stones behind them. She came to a tall building of gray stone and glass, with broad steps and a bronze revolving door reflecting the streetlights. She didn't know the name of the building, and didn't know who it belonged to. She only knew that her knees couldn't carry her another block. She sat down on the stone steps, just to the right of the revolving door, drew her knees close to her chest, and folded her arms around herself to steal back a little warmth. From a bronze vent beside the steps, a stream of warm air drifted out, carrying the scent of butter melting in a cast-iron pan. She closed her eyes. She had no intention of begging for food. She only wanted to sit there a few more minutes, to warm her nose, to let the cold inside her bones retreat a little before she forced herself onward to somewhere she hadn't even chosen yet. But the warmth kept pulling at her. She rose with difficulty. She walked toward the revolving door. Behind the glass, a doorman of about 60 stood behind a wooden podium, silver-haired and dressed in a dark blue uniform. His name was Eddie Malone, and he had worked at Sterling Tower for 12 years. He saw her through the glass. In those 12 years, he had seen at least 50 homeless people try to step into the building. For all 50 before her, he had gone outside and politely directed them elsewhere. But tonight, when the old woman's pale green eyes met his through the pane of glass, something caught in his chest. He didn't know what it was. He only knew that if he walked out and sent her away, he wouldn't sleep tonight. So he stayed where he was behind the podium. He let her in. She pushed through the revolving door and entered the lobby. The space was as vast as a cathedral, with polished black marble floors reflecting the light of crystal chandeliers. 2 women in fur coats looked at her from near the distant elevators, their lips parting and then closing again. A man carrying a leather briefcase paused in the middle of the lobby, looked at her for 1 second, then turned in another direction. She paid no attention to any of them. She only followed the smell of butter, roasted meat, and red wine being gently warmed, all of it drifting down from somewhere high above, slipping through the elevator shafts and spreading across the lobby. She stepped into an elevator that had just opened. Inside stood a middle-aged man in a gray suit, holding a file case. He looked at her, frowned, and seemed about to say something. But then he saw her trembling hands, saw the way she leaned against the elevator wall for support. He said nothing. He only tilted his finger toward the button panel, pressed 58 for her, and stepped out. The elevator doors closed. The car rose. Eileen shut her eyes and rested her back against the glass wall. At each floor, a soft chime rang out in the small enclosed space. 50, 55, 58. Ding. The doors opened. The smell of food rushed toward her like an embrace she had forgotten she once knew. She smiled for the first time in many days. She stepped out of the elevator, her old shoes making almost no sound across the black marble floor of Celestine. Soft jazz was playing. Diners sat scattered at ebony tables lit by beeswax candles, and at the reception stand to the right of the elevator, Bianca Whitaker had just lifted her head from her tablet. Her sharply lined eyes stopped on the worn brown wool coat. The polished smile on her lips faded slowly away. Bianca Whitaker, 36 years old, the general manager of Celestine, stood behind the ebony reception stand like a statue polished so perfectly that there was no room for dust to cling. Her platinum blonde hair was pressed sleek and straight, tucked neatly behind her right ear to reveal a pair of small pearl earrings. Her smoke-gray Armani suit fit her shoulders with exact precision, and on the left side of her chest she wore a silver orchid pin. Her eyes moved from top to bottom over the small figure standing before the stand, the worn brown wool coat, the torn fingertips of the gloves, the old shoes that had long since lost all cushion, the canvas bag with embroidered initials. She finished classifying the woman in 3 seconds. The smile she had practiced for years never left the corners of her mouth. It only cooled by half a degree. "Ma'am," she said, her voice soft as silk soaked in ice water. "Are you on the wrong floor?" Eileen bowed her head with quiet respect. The bow of a generation of women taught that even old age must remain polite before the person holding the key to the door. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from 3 days without speaking to anyone. "Miss, I'm not here to beg. I don't have money, and I know this place isn't for me. I'm only asking to stand near the door for a few minutes, just until my hands warm up, and then I'll leave." Bianca kept the same smile, but the corners of her eyes lifted by the smallest fraction. "Ma'am, this is a private restaurant, not a stopping place for stray guests. A seat here tonight costs $380 per person. St. Patrick's Church is 2 blocks from here. They serve hot soup on Friday evenings. I think you'd be more comfortable there." Eileen nodded, her lips trembling, but she didn't lift her feet right away. She looked down at the black marble floor, glossy as a lake at night, then raised her eyes to Bianca one more time, like someone about to ask for something she knew she had no right to ask. "Just let me stand by the door, miss. I won't sit at a table. I won't order anything. I won't touch a single thing that belongs to you. I only need the warmth. Just 10 minutes. Bianca tilted her head slightly to the right. That thin smile remained suspended on her lips like a sign that never changed color. "Ma'am, Celestine isn't a public furnace. Please understand. At the end of the lobby, there's an elevator down to the ground floor. The guard downstairs will point you in the right direction. For 1 second, the whole restaurant seemed to stop breathing. A husband and wife at a table near the window had stopped eating. A businesswoman at table 6 set down her wine glass, but no one said anything. In the world of the people seated here, standing up to defend a homeless old woman wasn't on the menu. Eileen bowed her head once more, so faintly that Bianca wasn't even sure whether she had bowed at all, and then she turned away. She managed 3 steps. On the 4th, both knees gave way like rotten boards that couldn't bear 1 more second of weight. She fell sideways onto the marble floor, her right shoulder hitting first, then her hip. The sound of the canvas bag slipping from her shoulder and landing on the floor was very small, almost soundless. The mouth of the bag fell open. 3 things rolled out across the polished black stone. A brown leather Bible, its page edges yellowed and bent from having been turned thousands of times. A bronze veteran's badge, engraved with a 5-pointed star and a line of small words worn down by time, and a black and white photograph kept inside a crumpled, clear paper sleeve, falling at an angle to reveal the image of a 13-year-old boy standing between 2 adults, dressed in a small suit, dark hair neatly combed, and light-colored eyes, blue eyes like ice at night, eyes that if anyone on the 60th floor of this tower were to see them, that person would collapse where he stood. 3 VIP tables looked up. 1 woman lifted a hand to cover her mouth, but at that exact moment, the internal phone on Bianca's reception stand began to ring. She glanced down at the screen, saw the name of a guest reserving a private table for 10 the next evening, and her face opened into another flawless, professional smile. She turned her back on the old woman lying on the floor, took 3 steps toward the hallway behind the stand, lifted the receiver, and spoke in a voice sweet as honey. Eileen pressed both hands against the cold marble and pushed herself up little by little. No one rose to help her. Not 1 employee, not 1 diner, not 1 pair of hands. She picked up her Bible, picked up her husband's badge, picked up the black and white photograph of the blue-eyed boy, and gently blew the dust from the surface. She folded the mouth of the canvas bag closed, slung it back over her shoulder, and walked in short steps toward the low stone ledge near the glass window, the place meant for guests waiting to be seated. She sat down there. Her thin shoulders dropped like 2 dry branches breaking in the night. 2 tears slid down her wrinkled cheeks, then 3, then 4. They made no sound, no sob. They simply ran down in silence, as if she had cried this way so many times that her body no longer needed sound at all. At exactly 5:05 in the evening, Meredith stepped out through the back kitchen door, 1 hand still smoothing the front of her apron. She meant to go straight to table 4, where a couple of regular guests had been waiting for the service she had given them every week for the past 3 months. But on her second step, she stopped. Her eyes caught on a small figure curled in on itself on the low stone ledge near the window. The worn brown wool coat, the plaid scarf, the canvas bag with the embroidered letters. Eileen. Meredith didn't stop to think. She walked, then ran, across the marble dining room, the heels of her shoes striking the floor in sharp little bursts, not caring how many pairs of VIP eyes turned to follow her. When she reached the ledge, she dropped to her knees, both knees touching the cold floor, though she felt none of the cold. "Eileen," she called, and her voice broke in the middle of the woman's name. The old woman lifted her head slowly, as though she needed time to decide whether this was real or just another dream in the long procession of hunger dreams that had visited her over the past 3 days. Her pale green eyes blinked twice, then lit up. It wasn't the light of a person being saved. It was the light of someone who had just realized she had not been completely forgotten in this world. "Child," she whispered. Meredith took both of her hands. They were so cold that she flinched on instinct for 1 second, then held them tighter. "Why are you here? Did someone do something to you? Have you eaten anything?" The 3 questions rushed from her mouth in a single breath. Eileen gave a weak shake of her head. "I'm all right, child. I just lost my way a little. The police drove me off at noon. I wandered until I got here, and then I smelled the soup I knew. And I thought maybe I could just stand by the door for a little while and get warm." Meredith rubbed the woman's thin hands between her own, gently working warmth back into them, breathing heat over her fingers. But even as she did it, her eyes were tracing every line in Eileen's face. Today she looked different, thinner than last week. Her cheeks had hollowed another layer inward. The dark circles beneath her eyes were no longer just shadows. They were bruised purple stains sunk deep into the skin. Her lips were cracked. 3 days. 3 days without a hot meal, without a blanket, without anything that could truly be called a home. Meredith took in each of those changes the way a nurse might chart symptoms silently in her mind, refusing to let herself cry. Not yet. Not now. Eileen looked at her. Not with the weakly look she always gave her. Not that quiet gratitude Meredith had come to know, but with something deeper. Deep as the bottom of an old stone well in the countryside, the kind of well where if you leaned over it, you could hear your own voice come back to you. "Child," she said, her voice softer than the jazz drifting through the room. "There's something I want to tell you. I don't know what it is about today, but I have a feeling I haven't had in many years. I feel that today is the day everything in my life is going to change. And maybe yours too. I can't explain it, but I want you to remember this. No matter what happens tonight, I want you to remember one thing. You are the one who kept me alive through this winter. Only you." Meredith blinked 3 times. She didn't cry. She gave a small nod, squeezed Eileen's hands once more, then stood up. "I'll be right back. Wait for me 1 minute. Don't go anywhere." She moved quickly to the kitchen door, pushed through the swinging panel, and stepped inside. Raphael was standing beside the big stove, already holding a silver tray in his hands. On it sat one of Celestine's finest white porcelain bowls, the kind the restaurant reserved only for the Saturday night wine tasting tables, filled to the brim with steaming pumpkin soup. Beside it were 2 slices of buttered bread and a cup of hot ginger tea. He didn't look at her. He only said, his voice low, as though he were issuing an order to himself, "Take her to the staff table in the corner, behind the stone column, out of the VIP line of sight. If Bianca asks, I'll handle it." Meredith took the tray. She went back out, circled around the ebony partition, came to Eileen's side, and bent down gently. "Come with me. There's a warmer place over here." She supported the woman with one hand, balanced the tray with the other, and led her to the corner of the room where a small wooden table for staff meals sat hidden behind a gray, veined stone column. Eileen lowered herself into the wooden chair. Meredith set the tray in front of her. The old woman looked at the bowl of soup. The heat rising from the surface of the deep orange broth fogged her old glasses and blurred half her face for one trembling moment. She let out a long breath, slow and deep, as though she had been carrying that breath in her chest for days. "It's been a very long time," she said, her voice rough. "I can't even remember when I last had a hot meal." "Eat," Meredith whispered, sitting down in the chair across from her. "Don't think about anything. Just eat." Eileen picked up the spoon. Her hand trembled slightly. She lifted a small spoonful to her mouth and closed her eyes. There was no sigh, no audible swallow, only the slowing rhythm of her breathing, and 2 tears slipping softly down to the rim of the white porcelain bowl. Meredith sat still and said nothing. She only watched. She didn't touch her, didn't offer a napkin, didn't ask a question. She understood that this was a moment the woman needed alone with her spoon and her soup, even with Meredith sitting across from her. And at that exact moment, from somewhere behind them, a voice rang out, cold and sharp. Each syllable spoken slowly, like the sound of Louboutin heels striking the floor as they drew near. Meredith Holloway. The red soles of Bianca Whitaker's Louboutin heels struck the black marble floor like nails being driven in with slow, measured blows. She moved around the gray-veined stone column and stopped at the head of the small wooden table, leaving just enough distance between herself and Eileen for every diner in the main room to see the narrow line of her back inside the Armani suit. Her gaze swept over 3 points in one carefully calculated line. Meredith, in her black and white server's uniform, standing now, the old woman in the worn brown wool coat, still holding her spoon, and the steaming white porcelain bowl resting in the center of a spotless white napkin. "What exactly are you doing here, Holloway?" Bianca's voice wasn't loud. It was sharp. The final 4 words were clipped cleanly, each syllable separated like 4 cuts through a thin piece of cloth. Meredith rose so quickly that the wooden chair behind her nearly toppled if the edge of the table hadn't caught it. She stepped forward, a small movement, but enough to block Bianca's view of Eileen with her own body. Her legs were trembling, but her voice stayed level. "Miss Whitaker, she's sitting at the staff table. This bowl of soup is my meal for the shift. I shared it with her. I didn't seat her in the dining room. Staff meal." Bianca lifted one corner of her mouth, and the sound that came from her throat wasn't really laughter at all, just a short, dry thing that broke in the middle. Your staff meal is served in a Bernardaud bowl worth $240 apiece, set on Belgian linen, with 96-hour fermented bread and organic ginger tea. I truly had no idea Celestine had started paying waitstaff that generously. Meredith's face went pale. She hadn't known the bowl cost that much. In the kitchen, Raphael had chosen the finest one from the shelf, chosen it so quickly she hadn't had time to notice. Her hands curled tight behind her back, fingers pressing into her palms. "I'll pay for it," she said. "I'll pay for all of it. Take it out of my wages. Pay for it." Bianca repeated the phrase as though it amused her. "Your wages last month were $2,800. I remember quite clearly because I signed the paperwork myself. The bowl is $240. The pumpkin soup on the menu is $28. The ginger tea is $8. That doesn't include the bread, doesn't include the butter, and doesn't include the time you're standing here instead of serving my table for. Do you know what that adds up to, Holloway?" Meredith didn't answer. She didn't need to. Bianca hadn't asked in order to hear a reply. Bianca took half a step closer, moving toward the bowl of soup. Eileen didn't shrink back, didn't lower her head, didn't avoid her eyes. She simply lifted her pale green gaze and looked directly into Bianca's face. There was no fear in that look, not the fear of someone who had been driven away from too many places over the last 3 days. There was no bitterness either. There was only an old, deep sorrow, the sorrow of a woman who had seen this kind of person many times in her life and, every time she met one again, still couldn't understand why. Bianca held that gaze for 1 second, then turned her head toward the main dining room and raised her voice just enough for the nearest 3 rows of tables to hear clearly. "Ma'am, I already asked you politely to leave once at the reception stand less than 10 minutes ago. I'm now asking a second time. If there has to be a third time, I will be forced to call security to escort you back down to the ground floor. I hope you understand the position I'm in." The entire restaurant fell into a strange stillness. The jazz was still playing, but suddenly it sounded as though it were coming from another room. Eileen placed her spoon down beside the napkin. She did it slowly, every motion quiet, without the smallest sound. Then she rose to her feet. Her knees trembled, but she braced herself on the edge of the table and stood straight, refusing to let Bianca see the shaking. "Miss," she said, and her voice had found its old depth again, the depth of a woman who had once been the head nurse of an emergency ward, the same voice she had once used with her night patients 30 years earlier. "I'll go. But I ask you one thing. Not for me, but for the bowl of soup. Please don't pour what's left into the trash. If no one here wants it, please take it home for some neighbor's dog. I've lived long enough that I can't bear the sight of food being wasted." A woman at table 12 lifted her hand to her mouth in silence. A male guest near the window set down his silver fork and forgot to place it properly. Meredith could hear the pounding of her own heart inside both ears. What Eileen had just said, every single word, cut into her chest like a blade so thin it almost felt delicate, and yet sharp enough to leave a wound she knew she would never forget. She would never forget that sentence. Never forget the way a woman pushed from one doorway could still turn back and ask that a dog she had never met be allowed to eat its fill. Bianca heard her. She did hear her, but not a single muscle moved in her face. She didn't blink more slowly. She didn't tilt her head. She only extended the hand wearing the Cartier diamond ring toward the porcelain bowl, lifted it neatly with 2 fingers, balanced it with practiced ease, and turned away. "Wait." Meredith stepped after her, one hand lifting as if to stop her. But Bianca had already turned her back completely, and the red soles of her heels were already striking their hard little rhythm toward the bar at the far end of the dining room, the bowl swaying lightly in her hand with every step, steam rising from the orange surface of the soup and dissolving into the cold air of the restaurant. Bianca walked slowly toward the far end of the dining room, where the black stone bar led into a narrow passage behind a gray velvet curtain. There, hidden from the sight of most of the guests but still close enough for the last 2 tables to see clearly, stood a large stainless steel trash bin with a foot pedal lid. She didn't step on the pedal to open it. She didn't have to. The lid had already been left open by a busser since lunch. Meredith followed 2 yards behind her, both hands drawn together at her chest, as though she wanted to stop something she already knew she couldn't stop. Bianca came to a halt in front of the trash bin. She didn't turn around. She only tilted the white Bernardaud bowl very slowly between the 2 fingers adorned with her Cartier ring. The golden orange pumpkin soup slid over the lip of the bowl and spilled down onto the damp trash below. The sound it made when it hit the bottom of the bin was a thick, blunt thud, short and dry, like a fist striking a thin board. In the silence that had settled over the restaurant, that sound rang louder than any spoken line. The slice of buttered bread fermented for 96 hours fell last, turning once in the air before landing face down in the slick refuse. Eileen was still standing at the small wooden table in the corner. She didn't look toward the trash bin. She looked down at the empty tabletop. Her thin hands slowly curled into two small fists, the knuckles trembling. Then the tears began to fall. A silent tremor took hold of her, her breath hitching as tears traced hot, wordless paths down her cheeks. Meredith spun around. She ran back to Eileen in 3 steps, then 4, and dropped to her knees in front of her, wrapping both arms around that frail body. "Eileen," she whispered into the shoulder of the wool coat. "Eileen, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't protect you." Eileen raised a trembling hand and stroked Meredith's chestnut hair. Each stroke, slow and steady, the way she had once stroked the hair of her night patients many years earlier. "It's not your fault, child," she said, her voice rough and broken, yet clear with every word. "This is the kind of world where sometimes a plate of food has to fall into the trash before anyone understands how much it was worth." At table 12, a woman of about 50, wearing a blue velvet coat with short salt and pepper hair, quietly lifted her phone from the table. She didn't call for the manager. She didn't wave down a server. She only switched on the camera, leaned the phone against the base of her wineglass to steady it, and let it record everything. This wasn't the first time in her life she had witnessed something wrong, but it was the first time she had been calm enough to do something useful with that witness. Meredith held Eileen tightly for 1 more second, then slowly let go. She rose to her feet. She turned halfway toward the bar, where Bianca was still standing with the empty porcelain bowl in her hand, about to pass it to a busser. Meredith took 3 steps forward, enough for the surrounding tables to see her clearly, and spoke in a voice that trembled but didn't weaken, loud enough to echo back from the vaulted ceiling of the restaurant. "Miss Whitaker, that old woman just asked you for one thing. She didn't ask it for herself. She asked you not to pour out the soup. She asked you to take what was left home for some neighbor's dog. That is the woman whose bowl of soup you just threw into the trash right in front of her." In the space of 2 seconds, Bianca's face passed through 3 expressions. First came surprise, because no employee had ever spoken to her in that tone in the main dining room. Then came anger, her cheeks flushing pink beneath the powder. Then came the third thing, the thing she was better than anyone at hiding behind that polished smile, the humiliation of a woman who had just been exposed in public. She set the empty porcelain bowl down on the bar with slightly more force than necessary. Then she walked toward Meredith, each red-soled Louboutin heel striking the floor like a series of small hammer blows. "Meredith," Bianca said, her voice lowered now, but with a strand of steel pulled tight through that low register. "Go to the staff dressing room, right now." Meredith didn't answer at once. She turned back to Eileen, helped her stand, and guided her in short, careful steps to the old velvet chair set beside the glass window, the same place where she had sat crying earlier. Meredith eased her down into the chair, drew the front of her coat closed, and smoothed the plaid scarf neatly into place. At that same moment, the kitchen door swung open again. Raphael stepped out, carrying a fresh cup of ginger tea, steam rising from it. He walked straight to the window table, set the tea in front of Eileen, and didn't look at Bianca or Meredith. He only dipped his head slightly toward the old woman, like an old soldier saluting another old soldier on a battlefield long after the fighting was done. Eileen lifted her eyes to him. In those pale green eyes, she recognized at once what very few people still knew how to recognize in a 42-year-old chef wearing a white apron. She recognized the eyes of a man who had once lived in places from which very few returned whole. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am," Raphael replied, just as softly, then stepped back, taking up a position close enough to protect her, and far enough not to strip away any more of her dignity. Meredith bent close to Eileen's ear for 1 second. "Wait for me here, Eileen. Don't go anywhere. Raphael will watch over you. I'll be right back." The old woman gave a small nod. Meredith straightened, drew in a deep breath, and followed Bianca around the bar, past the kitchen door, down the short hallway in the back, and stopped before a black-painted wooden door with a small sign that read, "Staff Dressing Room." Bianca pushed it open. Meredith stepped inside after her. The door closed behind them, the hinges giving a faint little crack, and all the sounds of Celestine were shut away on the other side. The black-painted wooden door closed behind the 2 women with the faint snap of an old hinge. The staff dressing room at Celestine was a narrow, rectangular space, lined on both sides with rows of gray metal lockers, with a long wooden bench in the middle, and a large mirror at the far end, reflecting the yellow light from the ceiling. Bianca slid the lock into place. She didn't know that in the far corner of the room, hidden behind the row of lockers on the right, a new employee was standing completely still. Dina Hartwell, 24 years old, only 2 weeks into her job at Celestine, was halfway through changing her uniform. She had just pulled half of her white shirt over her head when she heard the door shut, and on an instinct she couldn't have explained, she pressed herself flat against the lockers, pulled her phone from her pocket, switched on the video camera, and stayed silent. "Who do you think you are, Holloway?" Bianca turned back, and her voice was no longer silk dipped in ice. It had become a wire-pulled taut. "Who do you think you are, standing in my main dining room in front of 30 VIP tables and choosing to stand with a homeless old woman instead of the person who pays your salary?" "Miss Whitaker," Meredith said. "I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to." Bianca cut across her and took a step forward. "You didn't mean to for the last 8 months, while you carried leftover food from this restaurant down to the homeless people at the corner of 5th Avenue. You didn't mean to today, when you let Raphael choose the finest Bernardo bowl for an unwashed old woman. You never mean anything at all, do you? I've known every bit of it. Week after week. I was only waiting for the day you made it big enough for me to have a reason. Today is that day. You're fired. Tonight. No salary for this month, no leave slip, no reference letter. You have 5 minutes to get out of this building." Meredith stood still for 1 second. Then she gave a small nod, accepting it. "Miss Whitaker, I understand. I'll go. But I'm asking you for one thing. Let me finish tonight's shift. My 28 tables are already assigned to me. I need tonight's tips to pay the rest of my mother's hospital bill. My mother has died, but the debt hasn't." "No," Bianca answered without taking even a second to think. "Take off the apron. Hand over your employee badge." Meredith didn't argue anymore. She reached behind her back and untied the knot of her apron. The black fabric slipped from her waist and fell into her hands. Then, by the habit of 8 months, she lifted her hand to her throat, unclasped the tiny hook behind her neck, and removed the silver sparrow pendant. She always took it off before folding her uniform into the locker, so the chain wouldn't kink, so the bird wouldn't be crushed against the metal. She placed the pendant on the surface of the wooden bench beside the apron. Bianca looked at it. A small old thing, not newly polished, lying against black cloth. One corner of her mouth lifted. "You wear something this cheap to work at Celestine, Holloway. In 3 years, I haven't seen you wear a single thing worth more than $20. You really don't know the first thing about taste, do you?" She extended the hand wearing the Cartier ring, about to pick up the pendant. In a reflex, Meredith herself didn't have time to think about. She caught Bianca by the wrist. "Please don't touch it." Bianca froze, not because it hurt, but from shock. An employee, a waitress making $2,800 a month, had just laid a hand on Bianca Whitaker. She jerked her arm back, then with that same hand picked up the pendant and held it level with her eyes. "Whose keepsake is this?" "My sister's," Meredith said. "Oh, interesting." Bianca turned the pendant over between her fingers. "And where is your sister now? Carrying trays like you, in hospice? Or did she leave you too?" "My sister is gone," Meredith answered, her voice flat as black water. 3 years ago. A bus accident. She was 14. For 1 second, the room went silent. In that second, Bianca had a way out. She could have set the pendant down. She could have turned away. She could have ended her evening at a point that still might have been redeemed. But the slope of anger and humiliation had already taken hold of her, and she refused to stop. "Well then, how perfect," she said, the corner of her mouth lifting 1 degree higher. "You bring the keepsake of a dead girl to work as a waitress, and hope the VIP guests will notice it, and pity you enough to leave a few extra dollars in tips. I truly thought you were cleaner than that, Holloway." She opened her fingers. The pendant fell to the gray tile floor with a small, hard click. Before Meredith could bend, before she could even reach for it, Bianca had already lifted the heel of her red-soled Louboutin shoe and brought it down. Crack. The sound wasn't loud. It was small, crisp, final, like a dry branch snapping in a winter forest. Bianca's heel came down over the little silver bird once, then lifted away. On the gray tile floor, the sparrow lay flattened on one wing, its head bent sideways, the silver chain curled beside it like a strand of hair. Meredith looked. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only looked, and in that instant, an old memory returned, fast and sharp as lightning. 13 years earlier, on her 15th birthday, Haley, her little sister, only 4 years old, had stood on a wooden chair in the tiny kitchen in Queens and handed her a gift box wrapped clumsily in torn newspaper. 10 years later, on her 25th birthday, Haley, 14 years old, had smiled brightly and given her a small box wrapped in blue paper, and inside was the silver sparrow, bought with 3 months of money saved from selling morning newspapers. Sister Mary, her baby sister, had said, "This bird is like you, small, but it flies far." Meredith bent down, slowly. She didn't pick up the silver bird with her fingertips. She slid her whole palm underneath it and lifted it as though she were lifting a heart still beating. Then she stood straight again. The silver chain hung between the closed fingers of her hand. She looked at Bianca. Her gray-blue eyes were no longer the eyes of an employee bowing her head and asking for work. They were no longer the eyes of a girl who had buried her mother and buried her sister. They were something else, something Meredith herself didn't yet have a name for. Her voice came as softly as breath, but every word struck the walls and came back. "You have just killed my sister one more time." Bianca let out a short, brittle laugh, but the sound betrayed her immediately, because it was the laugh of someone who was afraid. "Are you insane, Holloway? What are you even saying?" But Meredith's eyes didn't move, and it was precisely that stillness that made Bianca, for the first time in 8 months, feel something she didn't dare name. The instinct of a person used to controlling everything, when faced with someone who is no longer afraid, has only 2 choices: step back or attack. Bianca chose the second. She raised her right hand, the one wearing the Cartier diamond ring, and slapped her. Crack. The dry sound of the slap burst through the sealed room. Meredith's left cheek flushed red at once. The edge of the diamond left a thin line across her cheekbone. Meredith didn't turn her head. She didn't flinch. She only blinked once, and then her eyes returned to the exact same place, looking straight into Bianca's eyes. In the far corner of the room, behind the lockers, Dina's hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped the phone. But she held on. The lens stayed pointed exactly where it needed to be. Bianca stepped back half a pace. Her voice climbed higher and broke on one beat. You brought this on yourself. I won't take responsibility for it. I was only reacting in self-defense." Meredith didn't answer. She slowly folded the black apron with one hand while the other still held the crushed silver bird in her palm. She unclipped the plastic employee badge from the pocket of her white shirt. She placed the apron and the badge on the wooden bench, neat and straight, the same way she had laid them down for 8 months. Then she turned, walked to the door, slid back the lock, and stepped out of the staff dressing room at Celestine. The black painted wooden door swung shut behind her with the same faint snap as before. Only this time the sound closed the life of a waitress and opened something else she didn't yet know the name of. Meredith pushed through the swinging kitchen door and stepped inside. The yellow kitchen light fell across her left cheek, and it took Raphael only 1 second to see everything he needed to see. The red mark shaped like a hand, the thin line across her cheekbone, the crushed silver sparrow in her left palm, clenched so tightly that her fingertips had gone white. He set down the onion knife on the cutting board, not in haste, but not slowly either. He walked toward her, reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then pulled his hand back, because he knew this wasn't a moment that needed touch. "Sit down here," he said, his voice low. "I'm calling the police right now." "No." Meredith shook her head, then straightened. "No police. I don't want a scene. I just want to get Eileen somewhere safe before she thinks up something else. That's all I want tonight." Raphael looked at her for 1 second, then 2, and gave the faintest nod. "Sit and drink a glass of water," he said. "I'll handle the rest." He tapped the edge of the kitchen counter lightly, indicating the stool, then turned away and walked toward the shadowed corner beside the walk-in cooler. He pulled his phone from the pocket of his apron. He didn't dial the police. He scrolled through his contacts, stopped at a number with no name, only a single mark, and pressed call. This was a number he hadn't called in 8 months. It was a number he had been told to call only once, only when something truly serious happened. 2 floors above, in the large office on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower, Cillian Braxton's private phone began to ring. Not his main phone, the small black phone he had given to only 4 people in his life: Caden, Wesley, his private doctor, and a 42-year-old chef named Rafael Cortez. He had just poured his third cup of coffee. His eyes moved across the screen. Rafael Cortez. Rafael had never called. He only sent a brief message every quarter to confirm that the restaurant had received its donation. Cillian answered. Rafael. Mr. Braxton. Rafael's voice was rough, urgent, low. There's an old woman. She's sitting by the window in my restaurant, Celestine. Silver hair pinned in a bun, pale green eyes, a brown wool coat worn thin at both shoulders, a plaid scarf wrapped twice around her neck, an old canvas bag over one shoulder, with 3 letters stitched in faded thread. E.O''D. Cillian shot to his feet. His knee struck the edge of the oak desk. The cup of black coffee tipped over and spilled, spreading across the tabletop toward the black and white photograph of his father. He didn't reach for it. He didn't even notice. Where is she, Raphael? 58th floor, Mr. Braxton, right beneath you. My general manager turned her away at the reception stand. My waitress, Meredith Holloway, has been taking care of her for 8 months through Friday meals. She was just slapped by the general manager in the staff dressing room. Her cheek is swelling. The old woman's bowl of soup was poured into the trash in front of the guests, and Meredith's silver pendant, the keepsake from her dead younger sister, was crushed flat under a heel on the floor. Cillian tightened his grip on the phone so hard that the plastic backing gave a faint crack beneath his palm. The scar along the left side of his chin twitched once, and then went still. He looked at his father's photograph as the coffee spread toward the base of the frame, and for the first time in 6 years, he felt his knees go slightly weak. Keep her there, Raphael. At any cost. Don't let her leave the 58th floor. Don't let anyone lay another finger on her. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Yes, Mr. Braxton. The call ended. Cillian set the phone down on the desk and pressed the intercom button in the corner. Caden. On the other end, Caden answered within half a second. Yes, boss. 3 cars. Full security detail. Basement level. In 15 minutes we move down to the 58th floor. I've found her. On the other end of the line, Caden was silent for exactly 1 breath. Yes, boss. Getting ready now. Cillian pulled his black suit jacket onto his shoulders, fastened the front button, and adjusted the collar. He took out the white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter F, moved it toward the spreading coffee stain without letting the coffee touch the cloth, then slipped the handkerchief back into the breast pocket above his heart. He looked at his father's picture for 1 second. 20. Cillian. It's been 20 years of searching. Today. Beneath his own feet, he touched the glass of the frame lightly. Father, he said softly, only loud enough for himself to hear, I've found her. And for one brief moment, the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. The kind of lift no one on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower had seen in 6 years. 4 miles to the south, in a dark ground-floor apartment in Red Hook, Seamus Donovan was staring at the red dot now holding steady on the map at the center screen. Those coordinates marked the 58th floor of Sterling Tower. An hour earlier, Wesley Tate had texted him 7 words. She is inside the Braxton Tower. Wesley didn't know that for the past year, his wife had been treated with a rare experimental drug from a hospital in Berlin, and that the money for it hadn't come from Seamus, as Seamus had promised, but from an anonymous fund in Zurich that Cillian Braxton himself had quietly built. Seamus didn't know that either. In his own mind, he was still the one holding the strings. He stood up, threw his old leather jacket over his shoulders, and walked toward the door. It's time, he said softly to the empty room. 6 years. Today it ends. The clock set into the marble wall of Sterling Tower's lobby read exactly 5:42 in the evening when 3 Cadillac Escalades, black and glossy as crude oil, slid onto Park Avenue and came to a stop in a flawless line before the bronze revolving door. That was the exact moment the viewer had seen in the opening hook. Now the lens moved inside that moment. The middle car door opened. Cillian Braxton stepped out, his black suit jacket buttoned cleanly, his black tie knotted tight. Caden Wyatt, 30 years old, with a scar running down his left cheek, emerged from the lead car and took his place at Cillian's right side. 6 bodyguards in identical black suits, spread out in a formation, practiced hundreds of times. 3 moved briskly toward the bronze revolving door, while 3 remained by the vehicles, their hands resting close to their sides. No one spoke. No one hurried. Pedestrians on the Park Avenue sidewalk drifted apart on instinct, without understanding why they were moving. Cillian pushed through the revolving door. The warmth of the marble lobby struck his face. Eddie Malone stood behind the doorman's podium, one hand still resting on the register. He recognized that face at once. Everyone in Sterling Tower knew that face, even if very few ever saw it in person. He bowed deeply, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Braxton." Cillian gave only the faintest nod as he passed, without stopping, without speaking. The group moved straight toward the far end of the lobby, where a private keycard elevator waited, reserved only for the upper floors of Braxton Holdings. Caden swiped the card. The doors opened. 7 men stepped inside. The metal doors slid shut. The elevator rose slowly, not at full speed, because Cillian didn't want it to move fast. The electronic panel above marked the floors with soft chimes. 10, 20, 30, 40. The 3 guards behind them remained in absolute silence. Caden glanced at his boss. In 15 years beside Cillian, from the days when he had still been a 20-year-old young man standing beside Finnegan Braxton's coffin, to the night he wiped out the Donovan family 3 years earlier, Caden had never once seen his boss take a deep breath. Tonight he saw it. Cillian's chest rose with one large breath, then slowed, then rose again. The scar along his left jaw twitched faintly and then went still. Caden shifted half a step forward until they stood shoulder to shoulder, and spoke in a voice low enough for only the 2 of them to hear. "Boss, no matter what she's lived through in these past 6 years, she's still here. That's enough." Cillian didn't turn his head. He only gave a slight nod, his icy blue eyes fixed on the elevator doors ahead. 50, 55, ding, 58. The metal doors slid open. Soft jazz drifted in first. Then the scent of red wine, browned butter, and expensive perfume flowed into the elevator car. Cillian stepped out. The moment the polished black Oxford of his shoe touched the first slab of marble on Celestine's floor, the whole restaurant seemed seized by an invisible hand and pinned into a photograph. The music kept playing, but every other sound disappeared. At table 7, a middle-aged man was lifting a spoon to his mouth. The spoon slipped from his hand and struck the porcelain plate with a sharp clatter. No one bent to pick it up. No one turned toward the sound. Bianca Whitaker stood behind the reception stand. In her hand was a glass of white wine she had poured for herself after returning from the staff dressing room. Her eyes landed on the man in the black suit, stepping into the room. She had never seen that face before, but she had lived in Manhattan long enough. She recognized the unmistakable cut of a Savile Row suit and the quiet luxury of a Patek watch. Even the unhurried pace of his walk and the presence of his elite escort detail spoke of a power she had long feared. The wineglass nearly slipped from her hand. She tightened her grip just in time. She stepped out from behind the stand, but the polished smile she usually wore had no time to arrange itself, and her voice came out softer than silk soaked in water. "Sir, do you have a reservation for tonight?" Cillian didn't look at her. He didn't hear her. In his eyes, Bianca Whitaker didn't yet exist. His gaze was scanning the whole of Celestine in a diagonal line his mind had measured from the instant the elevator doors opened. And those eyes stopped on exactly one point, the small wooden table in the corner behind the gray-veined stone column. There, a small woman in a worn brown wool coat sat with her thin hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea that had already gone cold. Her narrow shoulders still trembled beneath the plaid scarf. Raphael stood by the kitchen door, close enough to protect, and he had already seen Cillian. He stepped back once, giving space. Eileen lifted her head. Her pale green eyes narrowed against the light, opened wider, and blinked once. At the far end of the black marble room, 18 steps away for a man who stood 6 feet 2, a pair of icy blue eyes was looking back at her. Those 2 pairs of eyes met in one silent second. A second that had spent 20 years circling Manhattan in search of each other, and now, at last, had come to stand at opposite ends of a single room. Cillian began to walk. 1 step at a time, slowly. His polished black Oxford shoes struck the black marble floor, each sound steady and separated by nearly a full second, like the pulse of an old clock, counting down 20 years. Caden and the 6 bodyguards remained where they were near the elevator doors, not one of them moving, not one of them letting his eyes follow. This wasn't their moment. Bianca Whitaker was still standing in front of the reception stand, the glass of white wine in her hand now completely motionless. She didn't understand what was happening. She only knew she mustn't move. A primitive fear, the kind of fear she had never learned to master in all her 36 years, was quietly climbing from her heels up through her spine to the back of her neck. At the kitchen door, Meredith had just pushed through the swinging panel and stepped out. The mark of a hand was still bright on her left cheek, the thin line across her cheekbone not yet dry. One lock of her hair had fallen loose, and in her left palm she was still clutching the crushed silver sparrow. She stopped when she saw the man in the black suit walking straight toward the corner where Eileen was sitting. Killian's gaze passed over her for exactly half a second, a glance so quick that even Meredith couldn't be sure he had really seen her, and then those ice-blue eyes went on. He reached the corner table. He stopped exactly one step away from the old woman's chair. Eileen lifted her eyes. In 1 second, her pale green eyes lit up, so brightly that even the lines around them seemed to fade. Then that light blurred, then returned, then blurred again, like a small candle shaken by wind 3 times. She didn't believe it. The face of the man standing before her was the face of a grown man she had never met. But the eyes, those eyes, she had held them in her arms 20 years ago on that winter night at the Metropolitan Opera, when they still belonged to a 13-year-old boy with his father's blood on his white shirt. Killian stood before her for 10 full seconds. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply let her look. He knew she needed that time in order to believe. She lifted a frail hand. It trembled. Her fingers, the skin thin as rice paper, brushed lightly over the scar running down the left side of his chin. That scar hadn't been there on the opera night 20 years earlier. It was a scar that carried the record of the 20 years she had not been there to see. Her fingers trembled as they traced it from top to bottom, as though reading a line of handwritten text. Cillian. Her voice broke on the second syllable. My boy, you've grown so much. And at that exact moment, the man who stood 6'2", the head of the Ashford Syndicate, the man whose name could make 7 families across the Northeast pull in on themselves whenever it was spoken, collapsed. Not onto one knee. Both of his knees struck the black marble floor. His forehead pressed against the back of the old woman's hand. His large hands lifted and enclosed that tiny hand between both of his palms, as though he were holding a thin stone that might break at any second. His shoulders shook. He cried without sound for 30 full seconds. There was no sobbing, no groan, no sound at all. Only those broad shoulders beneath the white shirt trembling in steady waves, like calm water hiding a current underneath, and tears sliding over the back of her hand, sinking into the thin skin there, then falling onto the white napkin on the table. The entire restaurant fell into absolute silence. The jazz had stopped at some point, and no one even knew when. No spoon touched a plate. No glass of wine was lifted. In this moment, the 38 VIP tables in the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan were witnessing something they would never be able to tell properly in words, no matter how many times they tried. Eileen didn't cry. She had no tears left for this moment. She had spent them all earlier on the stone bench near the window. She only drew her hand from between his, lifted his chin gently, and laid that frail hand against his black hair, stroking it slowly and evenly, exactly the way she had stroked the hair of that 13-year-old boy on that night while waiting for the ambulance to come. I'm all right, my boy. I'm all right. I'm still here. I found you, Cillian said, his voice broken and rough. 6 years. Where were you? What did you eat? Where did you sleep? Were you in pain? She took 3 breaths before answering. I didn't want the Donovans to find you through me, my boy. That night at the opera, I was up in the gallery. I saw Seamus come down from the second balcony. He saw my face. He knew I had seen him. If I appeared anywhere, he would know whom I had saved, and he would come for you. I had to hide. I had no other choice. Cillian lifted his head. His eyes were red, the bridge of his nose red too, but his voice was beginning to return to its old steadiness. He took both her thin hands and held them firmly, without hurting her. Eileen. The Donovan family was wiped out 3 years ago. Only one man survived, and he ran. He hasn't dared step out of hiding. You've been free for 3 years, Eileen. 3 years, and no one came to tell you. She closed her eyes. One delayed tear slid through an old crease in her face and all the way to the corner of her mouth. I didn't know. I just kept running. Cillian tightened his hold on her hands just a little. He bowed his head closer to her face and spoke so softly that only the 2 of them in that moment could hear. Eileen. That night at the opera, my father lived 11 more days. Long enough to hold me one last time. long enough to teach me the final thing he could teach, long enough to say goodbye. Those 11 days were what you gave me. You gave my father the time not to leave this world in silence. If it hadn't been for you that night, I wouldn't have had my father for even one more day. I've owed you for 20 years. Eileen's second tear fell then, but her voice steadied the same way it had 20 years earlier, when she told a 13-year-old boy to look into his father's eyes. She shook her head. It isn't a debt, my boy. It's grace. Grace doesn't need to be repaid. It only needs to be remembered. Cillian looked at her for a long time. Then he drew in a breath and rose. He helped her to her feet, one hand supporting her elbow, the other lightly lifting at her waist. Then he took off his black suit jacket. It was a custom-made Savile Row jacket lined in black silk. He draped it gently over her narrow shoulders and drew the front closed over her chest. The little old woman stood in the middle of Celestine, swallowed inside the enormous suit jacket of a Mafia boss. The hem hung almost to her knees. The scent of silk lining and sandalwood from Cillian's wardrobe drifted softly into her silver hair. Cillian turned. His ice-blue eyes were dry now. He swept his gaze across the entire dining room, across the 38 tables holding their breath, across Bianca gripping the reception stand so she wouldn't collapse, across Meredith standing at the kitchen door with the crushed silver bird in her hand. His voice was low, slow, and clear in every word, loud enough to echo against Celestine's high-vaulted ceiling. My name is Killian Braxton. This Sterling Tower is owned by Braxton Holdings. This restaurant, Celestine, leases its space from me, and the woman you all saw turned away from the reception stand less than an hour ago, the woman whose bowl of soup was poured into the trash in front of you, is the very woman who saved my father's life 20 years ago. Cillian's declaration of who he was still echoed beneath the marble vault when he slowly turned his head. This time, his gaze didn't pass over her. It stopped. At the kitchen door, beneath the yellow light spilling down from the ceiling, Meredith Holloway was standing there. This was the first time he truly looked at her. A loose strand of chestnut-brown hair had fallen across her forehead. Her left cheek still bore the red imprint of a hand, and the thin line across her cheekbone had already darkened. In her left palm, she was still gripping the crushed silver sparrow, as if she were holding on to something that would vanish the second she loosened her hand. Her gray-blue eyes didn't avoid his. They didn't drop. They didn't tremble. They only looked straight back at him. There wasn't a single question in her mind about who this man was. She didn't need to know the company name. She didn't need to know who owned the 3 Cadillacs parked outside. To her, tonight, this was the man who had draped his suit jacket over Eileen's shoulders. To her, that was enough. Killian walked toward her. Meredith took half a step back on instinct, her shoulder brushing lightly against the kitchen doorframe behind her. He stopped, keeping 2 paces between them. You're Meredith Holloway? Yes, sir. Raphael told me. Everything. I only did what had to be done, sir. He looked down at her left hand, where she was still gripping something small that no longer had any shape. What is that, Miss Holloway? Her fingers tightened 1 degree more. My sister. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. There are stories that can be understood from a single sentence, and for a man who had lived through the night at the opera, at the age of 13, he understood faster than most. He slipped his right hand into the left breast pocket of his white shirt, over his heart, and drew out something he had never let leave his side for more than 10 hours at a time, in 20 years. The ivory white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter F, in faded gold thread. The only keepsake he had left of Finnegan Braxton, the thing he hadn't given to a single woman in all the 20 years of his life since then. He held the handkerchief out toward Meredith. Wipe it away, Miss Holloway. She looked at the handkerchief. Then she looked at him. Then she looked back at the handkerchief. The gold-stitched F, the silk edges slightly worn at all 4 corners from being held too many times over the years. She gave a small shake of her head. I can't, sir. It's too beautiful. It once belonged to someone more beautiful. She reached out with 2 fingers. Her fingertips touched the corner of the handkerchief, and in that same instant, the back of her hand brushed the back of his hand. Half a second. No longer than that. Her skin was warm from standing in the kitchen. His was cold from walking through the October mist. She pulled her hand back as if shocked. He didn't pull his away. He only let go gently and allowed the handkerchief to fall into her palm. She took it. She lifted it to her left cheek. She wiped. The white silk absorbed the thin streak and a few strands of mascara that had run. With each motion, Her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes didn't blink. At the kitchen door, Rafael Cortez watched that moment for 1 second, then turned his head away. Near the elevator doors, Caden Wyatt watched that same moment for 1 second, then turned away too. Those two men, one a veteran chef and one the second in command of the Ashford Syndicate, realized something in that exact same instant. Something that neither Cillian nor Meredith themselves knew yet. Something that would take many more weeks, many more months, before the two people living it would be able to see it for themselves. Cillian turned his face away. He didn't let the moment stretch any longer. There are threads that have to be released, so they can tighten on their own. He moved around the gray-veined stone column and walked toward the reception stand on the other side of the dining room. Bianca Whitaker was standing there. She was no longer pretending to hold on to her professional smile. She was gripping the edge of the ebony stand with all 10 fingers to stop herself from collapsing. The glass of white wine had been set down on the counter at some point, and no one knew when. A bead of sweat ran down her forehead near her right eyebrow. Cillian approached. He stopped exactly 2 paces away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was low and even, each word placed like a nail being driven into wood. "Miss Whitaker, I have a few questions for you." But he didn't get to ask the first one. At the corner table behind the gray-veined stone column, where Eileen had just been helped back into her chair beside the now cold cup of ginger tea, the old Nokia flip phone lying on the tabletop suddenly began to vibrate. The metallic rattle of the phone against the wood made a strange little sound in the breathless silence of Celestine. The entire restaurant stopped breathing once again. Eileen looked at the phone as though she were looking at a snake that had just appeared. Her hands began trembling again. She lifted her eyes, her voice so quiet that only the 2 people nearest her, Raphael and Meredith, could hear clearly. "This number," she said. "Only 3 people know it. Raphael, Meredith, and Cillian." Cillian turned back. He walked quickly to the corner table, picked up the Nokia, and glanced at the screen. A strange number. Not saved in the contacts. No familiar code. He pressed speaker and placed the phone down in the middle of the wooden table, so that everyone standing within 10 feet could hear. A slow exhale came through the speaker. Then a man's voice, low, rough, carrying a thick Irish Boston accent, dry as wood cracking in winter, rang out through the black marble room of Celestine. "Hello, Cillian. It's been 20 years. Cillian stood perfectly still beside the Nokia on speaker. His ice blue eyes didn't blink once. The scar along the left side of his chin twitched once, then went still. Seamus. He spoke only a name. But inside that name lived 6 years of searching, 20 years of remembering, and an oath carved into his flesh from the time he was 13 years old. Eileen turned white. She gripped the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles lost all color. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Meredith, still holding the white silk handkerchief in one hand, moved around the small wooden table at once, dropped to her knees beside Eileen, and took the frail old hand between both of her own. She said nothing. She only held on. From the speaker, Seamus Donovan's laugh came out, dry and short, like a blade cutting through split wood. "I have waited exactly 20 years for this day, Cillian. Do you still remember that night at the opera? You were only 13. Your white shirt was soaked in your father's blood. I stood on the second balcony. I looked down at you for 4 full minutes. I could have finished it that very night. But I didn't. I wanted you to grow up. I wanted you old enough, powerful enough, rich enough in empire, so that today you would be tall enough to understand exactly what I am about to take from you. What do you want, Seamus? Eileen. She is the last missing piece in my collection. I took your father from you. I caused the death of her husband. I made sure her son never came home again. 3 people. She is the last one I have not laid hands on. For 20 years I stayed quiet. For 20 years I ate shellfish on a fishing boat in Red Hook and wondered which day she would finally step out of the shadows. Today she stepped out. Thank you for pulling her out for me. You're not getting anywhere near her, Seamus. She's on my floor. I'm already there, boy. In the basement of your tower, I have men in place. You're smart enough to know what they're carrying and what they can do in 15 minutes. I don't need to spell it out. You have exactly 2 choices. 1. You bring Eileen down to the basement in the service elevator. I finish this in 5 minutes. You live. Your pretty little waitress lives. The 42 diners in your restaurant live. Not one stone falls from Sterling Tower. Tomorrow everyone goes to work as usual. 2. You keep her on the 58th floor. My men come up. No one leaves Celestine tonight in one piece. No one. You do understand those 2 words, don't you? You have exactly 15 minutes to decide. The clock starts the moment I hang up. Click. The sound of the call ending cracked through the still air, and then the whole restaurant burst into a single wave of panic. A middle-aged man at table 3 jumped to his feet, reaching for his phone, his shout cutting over even the jazz. Call the police right now. Anyone with a phone, call the police. A woman at table 9 began to cry. 2 servers stepped back from their stations and pressed themselves against the gray-veined stone column. Killian raised his right hand. Just one hand. He didn't raise his voice, but in that room, the gesture carried more force than any shouted order. Sit down, all of you. No one calls the police. His voice was low and even. Manhattan police take an average of 20 minutes to get here at this hour, because Park Avenue is jammed. We have 15. Simple arithmetic. Sit down. The man at table 3 sat down. The woman at table 9 stopped crying. The 2 servers behind the stone column didn't dare move. Bianca Whitaker, in front of the reception stand, dropped to one knee on the floor. She clung to the edge of the ebony podium with both hands to keep the upper half of her body from collapsing after it. Tears ran down both sides of her face, dragging mascara into 2 dark streaks. "This is my fault, isn't it?" she said, her voice gone thin and broken. "I didn't know who she was. I swear I didn't know. Please, Mr. Braxton, I didn't know." Cillian didn't turn his head toward her. He had no time for Bianca now. He turned to Caden, his ice-blue eyes back to the old temperature they had carried for the last 20 years. "Caden, lock down both main elevators on this floor. Seal every stairwell door from the 30th floor down. Get the reserve team to block the basement stairwell from both sides. Call Special Agent Marlowe at the FBI on the private line. In 5 minutes, her SWAT team needs to be at the bronze revolving door on Park Avenue." "Yes, boss." Caden already had his phone out and was moving toward the edge of the dining room before the answer had even finished leaving his mouth. Cillian turned to Raphael. "Raphael, move every guest and every employee into the private dining room behind the kitchen. That room has a bullet-resistant steel door. I had it installed 4 years ago when I bought this tower. Lock it from the inside. No one opens it from the outside, not even for me." Raphael nodded, turned, and began guiding each table toward the kitchen entrance. He did it quickly and calmly, the way he once must have led his own men out of a burning house in a town no one wanted to remember by name anymore. Cillian walked back toward the small wooden table in the corner. Eileen was rising to her feet, his black suit jacket still around her shoulders. Meredith stood beside her, still holding the white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter F. "Eileen," Killian said softly, "you go with Raphael. You go into the steel room. That room is stronger than anywhere else in Manhattan tonight. You have to be inside it." Eileen shook her head. It was a slow, light shake, but final as an iron door closing. "No, my boy. Tonight you came here because of me. 20 years ago I did not leave your father. Tonight I will not leave you, Eileen." "But," she cut him off, her pale green eyes touching Meredith's for half a second before returning to him. "I will go. I will go into the steel room. If Meredith goes with me." Cillian slowly turned toward Meredith. He already knew the answer before he ever opened his mouth. But he still had to ask, because his father had taught him that a decent man always gives another person the chance to choose first. "Miss Holloway, please, go into the steel room with her." Meredith looked at him. Her left cheek still carried the red mark. The crushed silver bird was still resting in her left palm, but her gray-blue eyes were no longer the eyes of a 28-year-old waitress afraid of losing her job. They were something else, something he himself had once seen in his own reflection on the night he was 19 and chose to take over his father's empire. Her voice was flat, steady, and strangely calm. "No, sir." Meredith's answer had barely touched the marble floor when Cillian looked at her for one more second, then turned his head toward the far side of the room where Caden had just snapped his phone shut. "Caden, come here." Caden moved at once, decisive, and stopped in front of his boss, 3 paces from the corner table. Cillian lifted both hands, removed the black leather glove from his left hand, then removed the one from his right. He folded the 2 gloves and placed them carefully on the wooden tabletop, as though setting down sacred objects. Then he laid his right palm over the left side of his chest, directly above the beat of his heart. "Caden, without needing a signal, repeated the gesture exactly. His own right palm covered his heart. Cillian extended his right hand forward, palm up. Caden lowered his right hand into Killian's open palm. The two men clasped hands. All of Celestine stopped breathing. Not a single one of the remaining diners in the room understood what they were witnessing. Not one of them knew the name of the ritual, but every person could feel it. Too many things tonight had already gone beyond reason, and this was the next one. This was the Oath of Shadows, the oldest and most rarely invoked rite of the Ashford Syndicate. There was no knife. No blood was spilled, only a clasp of hands, a palm laid over the heart, and words spoken at a distance close enough that only the two men inside that grip could hear them. In the history of the family, each Ashford boss was allowed to perform it no more than 3 times. Killian had used the first before the flower-covered coffin of Finnegan Braxton when he was 19. He had used the second on the night he chose to erase the Donovan family when he was 30. Tonight was the third. His voice was low, audible only to Caden, standing less than 2 feet away. Caden Wyatt. From this moment on, Eileen O'Donnell and Meredith Holloway are blood of the Ashford family. If I do not return from the basement tonight, you are the only person left in this world who has both the right and the duty to protect these 2 women. If anyone, no matter who, lays even a single finger on them after I go, you will go to the end of the earth to find that person. Do you understand me? Caden lifted his free left hand and placed it over his own heart. Now both his hands were in the final positions of an oath. I understand, boss. Blood receives blood. A word is a word. They released each other. Neither man said another word. Killian bent over the wooden table, picked up the 2 leather gloves, and put them back on one at a time, slowly. Caden slipped his right hand inside his black suit jacket, reaching into the inner chest pocket, and pulled out something small. A matte black metal card, as thin as a credit card, with no writing on its surface, only a single recessed dot engraved into the right corner. He stepped up to Meredith and held it out. Alarm card, Caden said. Press and hold your thumb on this dot for 3 seconds. 12 of our men are stationed throughout the building. They will be with you in 40 seconds. You don't need to do anything else. You only need to press it when you feel danger. That is your entire job. Meredith reached out with 2 fingers and took the card. Her hand was trembling, but she didn't drop it. She lifted her eyes to Caden. For the first time that night, she truly saw the face of the man with the scar along his left cheek. There was no coldness in his eyes, not the coldness of a criminal. There was no calculation in them either, not the look of a man dealing in shadows. There was only one thing there, the loyalty of a soldier who had followed his commander for 15 years without stepping away. Thank you, sir, she said softly. Caden inclined his head, then stepped back and returned to his place near the elevator. Killian came to Meredith one last time. He stopped exactly 2 paces from her. His ice-blue eyes didn't look away. Miss Holloway, if I do not return from the basement tonight, Caden will take Eileen to my penthouse. You are invited to stay there with her in a private room, not because she needs you there, but because you need to be there. If you accept that invitation, the remaining debt from your mother's hospital bills, $47,000, will be paid in full tonight. If you do not accept, I will respect your decision, and you will still be free to go home to your own place. There are no conditions attached. Not because you must accept, but because you have already paid first. 32 Fridays walking 3 minutes to the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street with a still warm box of soup in your hands. Meredith lifted her face, her gray-blue eyes widening slightly. She was about to say something, perhaps to protest, perhaps to thank him, perhaps to ask how he knew all of this, but she never got the chance. Cillian bowed his head. This wasn't the nod of a polite man. It was a true bow, his head lowering deeply enough that the dark line of his hair came into her sight. In the tradition of the Ashford family, this was the highest sign of respect an Ashford boss could give to someone who did not share the family blood. In 20 years, no one except Eileen had received it. Then he straightened. He turned away. He walked alone toward the private elevator. His steps were no faster and no slower than they had been 20 minutes earlier when he first entered the room. Caden swiped the keycard. The metal doors slid open. Cillian stepped inside, then turned back, and his icy blue gaze rested for one final second on the 3 figures still standing in the dining room. Eileen inside the giant suit jacket, Meredith with the black metal card in her palm, and Caden with his right hand resting over his heart. The elevator doors closed. The private elevator doors had barely slid shut when Caden turned sharply and signaled for Raphael to begin moving. Raphael was already standing in the middle of the dining room. He brought his hands together in one light clap, his voice low and firm like a lieutenant evacuating his men from a house about to catch fire. "Everyone, please follow me behind the kitchen, into the private dining room, quickly and quietly, and no one is to separate from the group." The 38 tables began rising almost at once. A few people pulled out their phones, meaning to call loved ones, but Raphael gave a single shake of his head. "Not yet, please. Just get into the room first. Everything will be all right." The line of diners, a few servers, and the 2 bartenders moved with him through the swinging doors, down the short hallway behind the kitchen, and into the private room at the end. Bianca Whitaker went with them too, her left hand clamped around a glass of water she no longer had the strength to drink, her right hand gripping the shoulder of a woman in front of her so she wouldn't fall. Her mascara had run all the way to her chin. Meredith stood just outside the private dining room door. She waited until Eileen had been guided to her side by Raphael. The old woman was still swallowed inside Cillian's black suit jacket, her worn shoes whispering lightly over the floor. Meredith turned her head once toward the private elevator on the far side of the dining room. The metal doors were fully closed. The floor indicator was dropping. 20, 10. There was nothing left that could call him back now. Meredith bent close to Eileen. "You go in first, Eileen. Go in with Raphael. I have something I need to do." The old woman looked up. Her pale green eyes, already tired, now filled with a deeper layer of fear. "Child, what are you planning to do?" Meredith tightened her grip on the alarm card in her right hand. The crushed silver sparrow was still in her left. 2 objects. 2 pieces of 2 people in her life. Her hand was shaking, but her voice wasn't. "I can't let him go down there alone, Eileen." Eileen was truly frightened now. She reached for Meredith's arm and held on. "You don't understand those men. You don't understand who Seamus Donovan is. He destroyed my husband, destroyed my son, destroyed Cillian's father. He is a man without a bottom, child." Meredith lifted her other hand and laid it over Eileen's hand on her arm. She held it there for 1 second, then spoke, her voice soft but every word distinct. "Eileen, 3 weeks ago, I nearly lost almost every reason I had to keep going. I nearly wasn't here with you tonight. What kept me here wasn't that I had become stronger. What kept me here was every Friday afternoon, when I walked 3 minutes down to the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street, with a still warm box of soup in my hands, and you were sitting there, calling me your girl. I came to you 32 times. Tonight he is going down into the basement of this tower alone to save you, to save me, to save all 42 people in that room. I can't sit behind a steel door while he walks down there alone like that, Eileen. I can't," Eileen cried, not the silent weeping from earlier by the stone bench near the window. This time she cried aloud. "You have suffered enough already, my girl. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." Meredith shook her head once. "I'm not proving anything to anyone, Eileen. I just don't want to lose one more person I might still be able to keep." Caden had come up behind them without either woman noticing. He had heard every word. For the first time that night, when his eyes fell on the 28-year-old waitress who had taken off her apron and was standing in front of the steel room door, his look was no longer the look of a bodyguard toward a civilian, Gerkuching. It was the look of one fighter toward another, 2 people from no shared army, and yet equally ready to walk down into a dark tunnel. "Miss Holloway," he said, "you don't know how to fire a gun. You've never been trained. You can't help my boss the way you think you can." "I'm not planning to help with a weapon, sir," Meredith answered at once, before he had even finished. "I only want to be standing at the elevator when he steps out, so that when those doors open, he knows someone is waiting for him there, so that he knows not everyone only knows how to hide behind a steel door while he goes down alone to face the dark." Caden was silent for 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds felt like 10 minutes. Then he gave a single nod. "All right, but by my rules. You stay behind me. When the elevator doors open, I step out first. If anything feels wrong to me, I shove you back into the elevator, hit 58, and you go up. No argument. Do you agree?" "I agree," Meredith said. Caden turned to Eileen. "Please go into the steel room with Raphael now, ma'am. We will bring Meredith back to you safely. You have my word." Eileen no longer had the strength to argue. She lifted both frail hands to her throat, reached inside the collar of her brown wool coat, and drew out a small necklace. It was not silver and not gold. It was an old cord, darkened to the color of coffee by 60 years against human skin. And at the end of it hung a tiny wooden ring face, no bigger than the tip of a little finger, engraved with a simple cross. She slipped it over her head and, with trembling hands, fastened it around Meredith's neck, gently pulling down the collar of her white shirt so the cord would rest neatly along her collarbone. "I have worn this for 60 years, my girl. Now you wear it. So I will know you are coming back to me tonight. And so you will remember, while you go down there, that you are not going alone." Meredith bent and embraced her, held her tightly, only for one breath. Then she let go. Raphael came forward, turned Eileen gently around, and led her into the private dining room. The steel door, 4 inches thick, closed slowly. A heavy click sounded when the lock dropped from the inside. That click sealed an entire world of 42 people behind it. Meredith and Caden walked toward the private elevator. Caden swiped the keycard. The doors opened. The two of them stepped inside. Caden reached out and pressed B3, basement level 3. As the elevator doors closed and the steel car began to descend, Meredith placed her right hand over the left side of her chest. Through the fabric of her shirt, she could feel the black metal alarm card in her pocket. Through her skin, she could feel the small wooden ring face etched with a cross resting against her collarbone. In her left palm, she was still gripping Haley's crushed silver sparrow. 3 objects, 3 souls. A 28-year-old woman moving down into the dark. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had been afraid for too long, and tonight was the first night she had decided not to let that fear descend ahead of her. The floor lights dropped. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5, basement. The doors of the main elevator Cillian had taken slid open with a dry chime in the B3 basement of Sterling Tower. The long fluorescent lights running across the concrete ceiling flickered twice, and then held steady. The air in the basement carried the smell of machine oil, mixed with the damp scent of cement that had absorbed 30 years of moisture. Cillian stepped out alone. The cuffs of his white shirt were already undone, his black tie still knotted tight. The leather shoulder holster crossing over his left shoulder was no longer hidden beneath his suit jacket. Inside it rested his father's silver-plated Colt, 1911, the grip engraved on the inner side with 2 tiny letters, F.B. His hand didn't go to the grip. He didn't draw it. In the center of the basement, beneath the 3rd overhead light, Seamus Donovan stood alone. There were no 12 men surrounding him. There was no black van parked behind a concrete pillar. There was only a 63-year-old man with graying hair cut in a military style, wearing an old brown leather jacket, both hands raised above his head, palms facing outward, like a man who had known tonight's script in advance. "Nephew," he called. "Uncle," Cillian answered. He swept his gaze over the entire basement with the habit of a man who had survived 3 ambushes in 14 years. Behind the concrete pillars, into the shadowed corners, beneath the piping along the ceiling, no one, just as he had expected. "There are no 12 men, are there, Seamus?" Seamus laughed. The sound was dry and short, like rotten wood snapping in half. "Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. What does it matter, nephew? I didn't come here tonight to fight your 12 bodyguards. I came to finish this. Between you and me. Nothing to do with Eileen. Nothing to do with your little waitress anymore. Just the 2 of us." "Why would you do that?" Cillian said. His voice wasn't high or low. It was simply a real question. "Because I took your father from you, Cillian. For 6 years I've only managed a few hours of sleep each night, and I got even those hours only by telling myself that one day you would find me. Today is that day. I've waited a lifetime for today." He stepped forward once. Cillian didn't step back. The distance between them was now 4 meters. Seamus still had both hands raised. "You have the right, nephew. Blood for blood. Your father's law. My law. The law of the Ashford family and the Donovan family for 3 generations. I'm standing here. No weapon. No men. You pull Finnegan's 1911 from the holster. 1 shot. Tonight ends. You go back to Celestine, hold Eileen, drink a glass of wine with your pretty little waitress, and sleep. Done." Cillian looked at him for 10 seconds. Those 10 seconds weren't silent on the outside. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead. The ventilation still breathed softly through the round ducts in the ceiling. But inside Cillian's mind, those 10 seconds had no sound at all. The night at the opera, 20 years earlier, a 13-year-old boy, A white shirt soaked in his father's blood. 2 small arms holding the chest of a big man struggling to breathe. A woman's hand tearing a red cloak to press against the wound. Then fast forward 11 days. A hospital room. His father in bed. His father's large hand closing over the small hand of the boy. Killian, promise your father one thing. Don't become your father. 20 years. He hadn't understood those words. Today, beneath the flickering fluorescent lights of a concrete basement, he understood. Cillian reached his right hand behind his left shoulder and released the strap of the holster with one thumb. He drew the Colt 1911. The grip felt cool. He held the gun in both hands, the grip pointing upward. The barrel angled down toward the concrete floor. Then he bent slowly and placed the pistol on its side between himself and Seamus, exactly 2 meters from each of them. He straightened. Both hands fell loose at his sides. I'm not killing you tonight, Seamus. Seamus gave a short, sneering laugh. So you've turned coward, Killian. Finnegan Braxton's son has turned coward. I made my father a promise, Cillian said, his voice even. That promise was not to become him. For 20 years I didn't understand what that meant. I thought he wanted me stronger than he was, greater than he was, richer than he was, more ruthless than he was. I thought it meant all kinds of things. Today, standing here under these lights, watching you with your hands in the air, I understand. My father didn't want me to become the man who causes death. He died because of the law of blood for blood. He didn't want his son to die by that law too. He wanted that law to end with him. Seamus went pale. His mouth parted slightly. The hands he was holding up began to tremble. Then what are you going to do with me? Cillian pulled his private phone from his pocket. He opened a number already saved. He pressed call and put it on speaker. The line rang twice before a young woman answered, her voice crisp and controlled. Agent Marlowe speaking. Agent Marlowe, Killian said. Basement level B3, Sterling Tower, Park Avenue. I am turning Seamus Donovan over to the FBI. He has surrendered without a weapon. Evidence in the assassination of Finnegan Braxton in 2006, including surveillance footage from the Metropolitan Opera that night, a handgun carrying his fingerprints, and the original scene examination file has been in my personal safe for 20 years. I will transfer all of it to your office tonight. Across from him, Seamus's 63-year-old knees gave way and hit the concrete floor, for the first time in his life. Not because he was afraid. Fear belongs to people who believe death is the worst thing that can happen to them. Seamus didn't fear death. He had lived with death in his house for 40 years. What brought him down was something else, something colder and deeper. It was the feeling of a man who had prepared his whole life for one ending, and had just discovered that his enemy had found a punishment heavier than that ending. No, he whispered. No, nephew. Kill me. Don't do this to me. Don't. Killian lowered himself into a squat 3 meters away. Close enough to speak. Far enough that if Seamus moved, it could still be handled. You will live, Seamus, in a federal cell where I will personally pay for the highest level of security possible, so no one comes to visit you and no one comes to touch you. And every morning when you wake up, you will know one thing. Eileen O'Donnell is still out there. Safe, loved, called ma'am. That is your punishment. Not death. Life. While knowing you lost, Seamus's head dropped between his shoulders. His shoulders shook. He cried. The cry of a 63-year-old man doesn't sound like any other kind of crying. It is dry, short, and ashamed. At that exact moment, another chime sounded at the far end of the basement. The doors of the second private elevator slid open. Caden stepped out, his pistol already raised at chest height, both hands steady on it. Half a step behind him, in her black and white uniform with the apron gone, Meredith stood there, the red handprint still on her left cheek, the alarm card in her right palm. Killian turned his head back. Caden, why are you... But Caden didn't answer him. Caden wasn't looking at him at all. Caden's eyes were fixed on a point behind Killian's back. Killian turned toward that direction. In the dark corner behind the second concrete pillar on the right, about 7 meters from where he stood, a figure no one had seen slowly stepped out of the shadows. Navy blue 3-piece suit, horn-rimmed glasses, silver hair trimmed with precision. In the man's right hand was a small rectangular metal box with a red LED light on top, blinking in slow, steady rhythm. It was Wesley Tate. Killian, don't move another step. Wesley Tate's voice was shaking. His right hand held the small metal box up beside his shoulder, the red light on its surface still blinking in slow, steady rhythm. 45 years old, silver hair neatly cut, horn-rimmed glasses knocked crooked to one side, his navy three-piece suit wrinkled along the hem. He was the man who had stood beside Finnegan Braxton since 1998. The man who had carried 13-year-old Cillian out of the opera that night. The man Cillian had called uncle for 20 years. "This is the device," he said, his voice breaking in the middle of the sentence. "Seamus told me that if I pressed this button, this tower would lose control. I don't want to press it, Cillian. I never wanted to. But he left me no other choice." Cillian stood perfectly still where he was. He didn't turn toward Wesley right away. He looked straight at the concrete pillar in front of him, at the place where he had laid his father's gun on the floor only minutes earlier. Then he slowly turned half his body, just enough for Wesley to see his face, just enough for his voice to go straight into the older man's ear without passing through an echo. "Uncle Wesley." "Cillian," Wesley said. "I'm sorry. Your aunt. You have to understand." Cillian didn't cut him off. He knew Wesley needed to say it, but he also knew that time now was counting every second. So he began, slowly, peeling back each layer the way a man might unwrap an old wound that had been bandaged for 20 years. "Your wife has myelofibrosis, bone marrow fibrosis, a rare blood cancer, diagnosed 14 months ago." Wesley nodded. The corners of his mouth trembled. "The only experimental treatment with any effect at her stage is in Germany. Charité Hospital in Berlin. Not available in America. No insurance would cover it." Wesley nodded again, and tears were already beginning to stream down his face. "Seamus found you. Promised to pay for the medicine. In exchange, you gave him internal information from Braxton Holdings. Internal emails, safe files, my personal schedule, and most important of all, the number for the private phone I gave only to people I trusted." Wesley stopped nodding. He only stood there frozen, the metal box still raised in his hand. "Uncle Wesley," Cillian continued, his voice dropping another level. "For a year now, your wife has been taking that drug. The first shipment last October, the 11th shipment last month. But that medicine didn't come from Seamus." Wesley blinked. "It came from me." The box in Wesley's hand dropped nearly an inch. The red light kept blinking. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't be." "Seamus showed me receipts. Receipts from a pharmaceutical company in Frankfurt. They had stamps. They had signatures. I've been funding it through an anonymous foundation in Zurich since last August," Cillian said. "That foundation doesn't carry the Braxton name. No one in the family knows about it except me. Seamus found the name of the foundation, built a false shell of receipts around it, intercepted the real information before it ever reached you, and sent you his version with his name on it. You never touched the real layer underneath. Seamus lied to you from the first day. He never had that drug. He has no connection to Charité. I am the only person who has kept your wife alive this past year." "That can't be," Wesley repeated. Now the tears were pouring in 2 even streams. On the concrete floor to one side, Seamus was still kneeling, lifting his face. His voice came out in a harsh, broken shout, trying to cut through the frozen air. "Wesley, press it. Don't believe that boy. He's Finnegan's son. He was born to lie to you." Cillian didn't turn toward Seamus. He didn't give him even a glance. His eyes now held only Wesley. "Last month," he continued, his voice still even, "your wife received the 11th shipment, the same courier from Berlin. A doctor named Schmidt at Charité signed it off directly. Do you still remember his name, Uncle Wesley?" Wesley's lips moved. "Schmidt, Cillian repeated. "The same man I introduced your wife to last year, when you came to my house that evening in September and sat at the oak table on the back terrace. You told me about her diagnosis. You cried. I took Schmidt's number out of my private contacts. I wired the money through a Zurich account under Schmidt's name, 11 times, each one the day before the next shipment left Germany. Every one of those banking records is in my personal safe. And you, Uncle Wesley, have held one key to that safe for 20 years. Wesley could no longer stand upright. He leaned sideways and braced his shoulder against the concrete pillar to his left. Cillian drew the black private phone from his pocket. He opened the banking app, chose the Zurich account, scrolled through the transaction list, then held the screen out toward Wesley, his arm fully extended. "Read it." Wesley didn't want to read, but his eyes read anyway. 11 wire transfers, each around $80,000, each listing the recipient as Schmidt.Clinic.Charité. each spaced almost exactly 6 weeks apart, each falling on the day before Seamus informed him another shipment had reached Berlin. The metal box in Wesley's hand began to shake violently. It nearly slipped free. To Cillian's left, Caden Wyatt raised his gun, the barrel aimed straight at Wesley. He wasn't waiting for an order. He was preparing in case one became necessary. Cillian lifted his left hand, palm facing Caden. "No, Caden. He isn't our enemy. He's a victim." Half a step behind Caden, Meredith had lowered the alarm card to the level of her stomach. Her thumb pressed and held the recessed dot in the right corner. The tiny red light on the card began to blink slowly. 1, 2, 3 seconds. The signal had been sent. Within moments, the security detail would be here. She said nothing. She only held her thumb against the card, then slowly lifted it away. Wesley lowered the box. His arm fell to his side as though the bone had gone out of it. "Cillian," he whispered. "I was going to. I almost." "You were trying to save your wife," Cillian cut in, his voice still calm. "That's the only thing you were trying to do. You just believed the wrong man." Wesley collapsed. His 45-year-old knees struck the concrete floor. The metal box fell from his hand, rolled twice across the ground, and came to rest 3 feet from Cillian's shoes. The red light kept blinking. But nothing else happened. No explosion, no low vibration, not a single grain of cement dust drifting from the ceiling. The box simply lay there, harmless, its light continuing to blink in steady rhythm, like a child's electronic toy with fresh batteries. An empty shell. Seamus had lied to Wesley from the first day. There had never been a real device. Cillian stepped to Wesley and laid his right hand on the shoulder of the man he had called Uncle for 20 years. "Go home, Uncle Wesley. Right now. Hold your wife once. Tell her she is safe now. Tomorrow, at exactly 9 in the morning, come to my office on the 60th floor. You are not losing your job. You are not losing your family. None of that is happening. But you will sit with me all day tomorrow and tell me every single thing Seamus said to you in the past 14 months. Every sentence, every message, every meeting. So no one in my house is ever reached by his hand again." Wesley nodded. He couldn't speak a single word. He only nodded. From the far side of the floor, Seamus screamed, his voice cracking at the bottom. "You're all insane. All of you are insane. None of you understand the law." At that exact moment, the service elevator behind Seamus slid open with a chime. Agent Marlowe stepped out first, wearing a dark blue ballistic vest, her FBI badge glinting on her left chest, with 8 agents behind her, their guns already raised. Marlowe walked straight to where Seamus was kneeling. 2 agents at her sides bent to cuff his hands behind his back, and Marlowe began to read his identity and charges in the clipped, precise voice of someone who had prepared for this moment for 20 years of service. "Seamus Donovan, you are under arrest. First-degree murder of Finnegan Braxton in 2006. Conspiracy to blackmail. Threats against life. Use of a fake device for coercion. And participation in the unlawful attempted seizure of control of a civilian building. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say from this moment may be used against you in court." Marlowe turned and walked toward Cillian, then gave a small nod. "You stopped something terrible tonight, Cillian. Thank you." Cillian didn't answer. He didn't even look at Marlowe. His eyes had already moved elsewhere. He was looking at Meredith. She stood 12 feet away, 1 step behind Caden. 2 loose strands of chestnut brown hair had fallen across her forehead. Her face had gone pale. The red handprint on her left cheek had darkened another shade. In her left hand she still held the crushed silver sparrow. In her right was the alarm card, its red light still blinking steadily. At her throat, visible just above the neckline of her black shirt, hung the old coffee-colored cord with the small wooden ring face, carved with a cross. Cillian walked toward her. Meredith took half a step back on instinct, her back nearly touching the concrete pillar. He stopped. "You were not supposed to come down here, Miss Holloway." "I know, sir. You could have been lost tonight." "I know. Why did you?" "Because you went down alone," she answered, her voice so calm that even she didn't recognize it as her own. "I didn't want a man who had spent 6 years searching for Eileen to face the dark alone on the first night he found her again." Cillian looked at her for a long time, longer than the 10 seconds he had spent looking at Seamus. Above them, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. The distant clink of handcuffs had faded. The FBI agents were leading Seamus toward the service elevator. Wesley was still kneeling beside the concrete pillar. The metal box was still lying on the floor, its red light still blinking. But in this moment, Cillian saw nothing else except the woman standing in front of him. He didn't say another word. He only bowed his head, a true bow, the second of the night, and only the second in the 20 years since he had taken his father's place. After the agents led Seamus out of the basement through the service elevator, Caden helped Wesley to his feet from where he had been kneeling, slipped an arm around his shoulders, and guided him toward a car called up from the reserve team, sending him home to his wife. The harmless metal box remained on the concrete floor, and at last its red light went dark. Cillian, Caden, and Meredith stepped into the private elevator. Caden swiped the card. 58. The elevator rose, each soft chime steady as the rhythm of a breath returning after being held too long. The doors opened onto the 58th floor. Raphael was already waiting outside the private dining room, his apron gone now, his face carrying the exhaustion of a man who had kept 42 people safe through the longest 15 minutes of his life. He gave Cillian a nod. The steel door stood open. The guests and staff had come back out and were standing scattered across the main room. No one had returned to a table, and yet no one had left the 58th floor. They wanted to stay and witness whatever came next. In the chair at the center of the room, Eileen sat wrapped in Cillian's enormous black suit jacket, a fresh cup of hot ginger tea placed before her by Raphael. Meredith went straight to her, knelt at her side, and wrapped both arms around her. Eileen touched her cheek, looked at the silver sparrow still in her hand, then at the little wooden ring on the cord at her throat, and gave the smallest nod. You came back. I knew you would come back to me. In a far corner, Bianca Whitaker sat on a velvet chair, her head bowed, both hands resting flat on her thighs. The mascara had dried into 2 black streaks. She was no longer crying. She was simply waiting, because she knew it was not yet her turn, and she knew her turn would come. From the guest elevator, a 58-year-old man, balding, thick around the middle, in gold-rimmed glasses and a shirt soaked through with sweat, came rushing out after Raphael's message had sent him hurtling here in his car. Grayson Pendleton, owner of Celestine. He stepped out, looked at Cillian, and in 3 seconds realized his legs could no longer hold him. He sank to his knees, both of them hitting the black marble floor, his head bowed until it nearly touched the stone. Cillian passed him without a glance. He went first to Eileen, helped her into a softer chair with velvet cushions and armrests, drew the suit jacket more securely around her shoulders, and adjusted the collar. Then he straightened and turned to face the room. His voice was low, slow, even. You have leased this floor since 2019, Pendleton. The contract ends next month. I am not renewing it. Grayson bowed lower still, but he didn't dare complete the sentence he had begun. Mr. Braxton, I beg, but, Cillian continued, his voice not rising by even half a tone. I will sell this 58th floor to you, full ownership, for $1. 3 conditions. First, you dismiss yourself from all executive control effective tomorrow morning. Rafael Cortez becomes the new general manager, with a salary 4 times what you currently pay yourself. Second, 50% of Celestine's monthly profit will be transferred into the Eileen Foundation, a charity fund established in Eileen O'Donnell's name. Third, every Friday afternoon this restaurant will provide 20 free meals to the homeless, served at the main tables, not in corners. If you refuse any one of these terms, I buy back Celestine and dissolve every right you hold in it. You have 5 seconds to answer. Grayson didn't need 5 seconds. He nodded like a machine. I agree, Mr. Braxton. I agree to all of it. Immediately. Cillian turned his face away. Grayson was still kneeling, but from this moment on he no longer mattered. Cillian looked instead toward the velvet chair in the corner, where Bianca had begun trembling again. She was shaking so hard she could no longer rise when his eyes reached her, but Eileen laid one frail hand on the sleeve of Cillian's jacket and gave the smallest shake of her head. Cillian, let me. The old woman rose from her chair. She walked slowly, with short steps, the enormous black suit jacket trailing lightly behind her. She stopped in front of Bianca. Her voice was not loud, but everyone within several feet heard her clearly. Girl, stand up. Bianca stood. Her knees were shaking. She didn't dare raise her face. Do you know why I don't want Cillian to fire you? Bianca shook her head. Because if you were dismissed tonight, you would go home with hatred for me in your heart. You would blame me all your life. I am 72 years old, girl. I don't have enough time left to carry one more person's hatred at this age. I need one good night's sleep, and a person out there hating me wouldn't allow me that. She paused for a breath. But I want you to understand one thing before you walk away from tonight. The silver sparrow you crushed in the dressing room less than 2 hours ago. Do you know who it belonged to? It was the final birthday gift a 14-year-old child bought for her sister with 3 months of money saved from selling newspapers before dawn. A 14-year-old child who boarded a school bus on a rainy February morning 3 years ago and never came home in time for the meal her sister had cooked and left waiting. Bianca turned halfway toward Meredith, who was kneeling beside Eileen's chair. For the first time in 8 months at Celestine, she truly looked at Meredith Holloway, not as an employee earning $2,800, not as the untidy girl carrying food to homeless people at the corner. She looked at a woman she had never known existed, and that woman had been right under her eyes for 8 months. You didn't know, Eileen continued, turning back to Bianca. I do not blame you because you didn't know. I blame you because you never asked. Bianca broke down. Not like the tears of 3 hours earlier. This was something else. The kind of crying that breaks open from the center. The kind that belongs to a person who has finally seen herself in a mirror she has spent a lifetime avoiding. I want you to work for me, girl. 6 months. I am reopening a shelter in Red Hook, Brooklyn, the one I abandoned 14 years ago. You will be my assistant there for 6 months. Every day you come, you will look into the faces of 300 people who have no home. You will learn their names. You will hear their stories. You will learn how to ask before you judge. That is the only condition under which I do not dismiss you tonight. Bianca fell to her knees before Eileen, her forehead nearly touching the black marble floor. I'll do it, ma'am. I don't dare ask for forgiveness. I only ask for one chance to try. Eileen lifted her thin hand and placed it lightly on the crown of Bianca's head. A chance, she said, is something you must make yourself worthy of. I can't give you that. I can only leave the door open. Cillian waited until Meredith had helped Eileen back into the velvet chair. Then he turned toward Meredith. His voice was different now, slower, and for the first time all night, carrying something close to gentleness. Miss Holloway, I made you a promise upstairs not long ago. If you accepted my invitation to stay with Eileen, I would pay the remaining $47,000 of your mother's hospital debt. Tonight that question still stands. Meredith looked at him. For a long time. Long enough that the 30 people standing in the room didn't dare breathe too hard. Then she answered, her voice level, calm. Each word weighed before it was given. I accept, sir, but not as a debt I owe you. I accept because for 32 Friday afternoons, I walked exactly 3 minutes from Celestine's employee entrance to the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street with a still warm box of soup in my hands. If you call that a price, then I accept that price, because I paid first. 1 bowl of soup from me in exchange for $1 from you. Neither of us owes the other anything. Cillian smiled, the first smile of the night, and also the first smile many people in Celestine had ever seen on his face. Would you like to return to nursing school, Miss Holloway? I would, sir. The Eileen Foundation will establish a scholarship program for students in nursing and community care. You are the first candidate. If you agree, the paperwork will be completed this week. Thank you, sir. Cillian gave the faintest shake of his head. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. Because 3 weeks ago, on an evening when you stood on a bridge over the East River looking down at the black water, you turned back. If you had not turned back that night, Eileen would not have had a granddaughter tonight, and I would not have had this night after 20 years of searching. Meredith froze. She recoiled slightly. Her eyes widened. How do you know? Cillian didn't answer. He only turned his head toward Eileen. The old woman smiled. It was a tired smile, but warm, the smile of someone who had quietly seen more than she ever said. I told my boy, my girl. You never told me, but I knew long ago. Your eyes carried the wind of the East River. I knew from the 18th Friday, when you sat down beside me, lifted your face toward the river, and forgot to set down the soup for 2 full minutes. Meredith began to cry. For the first time since her sister's funeral 3 years earlier, not one silent tear on a subway train at 2 a.m. Not one blink swallowed down in a dressing room. She cried out loud. She cried like a child who had held back tears for too long. Cried until her shoulders shook in waves. And all of Celestine fell silent once more. Eileen held her in both frail arms, drew Meredith's head against her shoulder, and stroked her hair in that same steady rhythm with which she had stroked Cillian's hair 20 years earlier on the night of the opera. the same way she had stroked the hair of her own son on the night he never came home. She didn't say a word. She only kept stroking. Cillian stepped back once. He didn't interfere. He only stood there, his right hand resting lightly against the left breast pocket of his white shirt, where the silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter F still lay over his heart, and let the two women have the moment they had both waited years to receive. When Meredith's crying had finally softened into trembling breaths against the brown wool shoulder of Eileen's coat, Cillian stepped closer to them. He lifted his right hand to the ring finger of his left. There, on his hand for the past 20 years, was a solid gold ring set with an oval black onyx stone, the stone polished back to a gleam at least 6 times over those 2 decades, though the gold band still bore the fine scratches Finnegan Braxton's own hand had left on it while he was alive. It was the only thing Cillian had never taken off since the 11th afternoon in the hospital when he was 13 years old. He had worn it while bathing, while sleeping, while signing contracts worth $500 million, while kneeling before his father's coffin, and while erasing the Donovan family 3 years earlier. He slowly turned the ring on his finger. It had grown so used to his hand that he had to twist it 3 full times before it finally slipped free. Then he bent and placed it on the small wooden table in front of Eileen's velvet chair. The black onyx caught the chandelier light of Celestine and glimmered softly. "Eileen, this was my father's ring. I've kept it for 20 years. Today I return it to you, to the woman who kept my father alive for his final 11 days. Whatever you choose to do with it is your right. My only duty was to bring it back into your hands." Eileen lifted the ring in both of her frail hands. Her hands were trembling. She raised it closer to her eyes, looked at the black stone for 2 seconds, then looked at Cillian for 1 more second, and then turned her head toward the young woman still kneeling beside her chair. "My girl, give me your left hand." Meredith drew back slightly, shaking her head. "Eileen, I can't take this. It belongs to his father. It belongs to his family. It doesn't belong to me. You can." Eileen's voice had found again the old depth she must have once used in the emergency ward 30 years earlier, the depth that didn't allow argument. "From tonight on, you are my granddaughter. Not because of money, not because of anyone's debt, because 3 weeks ago you turned back from a bridge over a river. Because for 32 Fridays you walked exactly 3 minutes from the Celestine kitchen door to that street corner to bring me a still warm box of soup. Because today, when no one required you to go, you went down into that basement with Caden to stand at the elevator doors for Cillian. Those 3 things no one else in this world could have done for me but you." Meredith slowly held out her left hand. It was shaking. Eileen took the ring and, with both of her thin hands, slid it onto Meredith's ring finger. The gold band was a little loose for her smaller hand, but when Eileen pushed it down to the second knuckle, it settled into place almost as though it had always been meant to fit there. "From today on, my girl, you carry the Ashford name, not because you married anyone, not because anyone signed a paper for you, because you are my blood, and my blood is the blood of the Ashford family." All of Celestine fell silent. Caden stood near the gray-veined stone column, his eyes shifting briefly toward Cillian. Cillian was standing there looking at Meredith. Meredith was staring at the ring on her finger. It was heavy, cold, old, the black onyx carrying the tiny scratches of 20 years. And yet on her hand it felt warm, like a promise that had been kept hidden in a box for 2 full decades. She lifted her face toward Cillian. "Sir, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this." "You don't need to know anything at all, Miss Holloway," he answered. "Only wear it, and if a day ever comes when you need to call someone, 1 call will be enough. Not because you owe that call, but because now you have the right to make it." He drew a business card from the inner pocket of his shirt. The card was made of thick black stock, with no company name, no logo, no title. Only a single phone number printed in gold ink at the center. He held it out to her. Meredith took it. She turned it over. On the back, beneath the empty black space, was 1 small line written by hand in blue-black ink from an old fountain pen. The handwriting leaned slightly to the right. "If you ever stand in that place again, call me before the wind has time to change." She read the line once, then again. Then she looked up. Cillian had already turned away. He was bending to help Eileen rise from the velvet chair, one hand supporting her elbow, the other drawing the front of his black suit jacket closed across her chest. He wasn't looking at Meredith, but from where she stood, she could see the faintest curve at the left corner of his mouth. A curve Manhattan hadn't seen in 20 years, the Ashford syndicate had never seen, and even Caden, after 15 years at his side, had only witnessed exactly 3 times. The man who stood 6 feet 2, the head of the Ashford family, was smiling. Not at anyone in particular, just smiling. Cillian led Eileen and Meredith across the floor of Celestine, to the elevator, down to the ground level, through the marble lobby, and out through the bronze revolving door. The October mist had stopped at some point, though no one knew when. Manhattan's streetlights along Park Avenue blurred gold in the little puddles still gathered on the sidewalk. The 3 black Cadillac Escalades were still lined up in the same perfect row, in the exact place where the audience had first seen them in the opening moment 7 hours earlier. Caden had gone ahead and opened the rear door of the middle car. Cillian helped Eileen into the back seat. She settled herself there, adjusted the black jacket around her, and looked at Meredith through the open door. Meredith was about to turn away. She had meant to walk to the subway and go back to the shared room she rented in Astoria, gather a few clothes, and only tomorrow come to see Eileen. That was the way her life had always worked. Everything divided into small enough steps for her to carry. Miss Holloway. She stopped, turned back. Yes, sir. Tonight Eileen will sleep in my penthouse on the 62nd floor of this tower. There is a private nurse there, a private doctor. Everything she could need for one night. You are invited to sleep in a private room right beside hers. There are no conditions attached. Tomorrow morning you may wake up and go to work if you want to, go to school, or do nothing at all. You may leave whenever you feel you need to. You lose nothing and you owe nothing. But tonight, please don't leave her alone. She lifted her eyes to his. Why, sir? Cillian looked at her. His ice-blue gaze, beneath the blurred gold streetlights, had softened far more than it had at the beginning of the night. He answered in a very quiet voice, but every word was clear. Because she needs you more than she needs me, Miss Holloway. You gave her 32 Friday afternoons, while all I could give her for 6 years was desperate searching. You are better at being her granddaughter than I am. I can only be her son. Meredith stood without moving. Manhattan after the rain breathed softly around her. A yellow taxi passed behind her, its headlights washing over the black shoulder of her shirt for 1 second before they were gone. She didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. She walked to the car door, bent, and slipped into the back seat beside Eileen. The old woman reached over and laid her frail hand on the back of Meredith's hand. The black onyx ring on Meredith's finger brushed lightly against the old cord necklace resting at her throat. Caden closed the door. The sound of the Cadillac door sealing shut was clean, solid, final. Cillian walked around to the front passenger side. The engine started. One by one, the 3 black Cadillac Escalades pulled away from the Park Avenue curb and slipped into the Manhattan night, which had already begun to dry. 3 months after that October night, New York had moved into the heart of January. White snow covered the sidewalks of Brooklyn, covered the roofs of the old warehouses in Red Hook, and even settled over the small new brass plaque mounted beside the front door of a freshly painted 2-story building. On that plaque there was only one line engraved in capital letters, Eileen Foundation Relief Station, and beneath it, a short sentence that Cillian had written into the design with his own hand. Here, people are called by name. This was the Foundation's first station, opened exactly 4 weeks earlier. Every day, 300 homeless people from all 5 boroughs of New York came here for a hot meal, a warm shower, free medical care, and above all, to be asked their name before anyone handed them a tray. The house stood in Red Hook itself, only 2 blocks from Seamus Donovan's old apartment. As one quiet way Cillian had chosen to turn a corner of the city that had once been shadow into a place of light, something Seamus, sitting in a federal cell in Pennsylvania, would never be allowed to see again. Behind the reception counter in the center of the room stood Meredith Holloway. She was 28 years old, her chestnut brown hair cut shorter now and tied back at the nape of her neck with a black fabric band. She wore a white nursing blouse, the first-year uniform of the Hunter College nursing program, her full scholarship from the Eileen Foundation having been transferred into her tuition account 3 weeks after that night. At her throat, just visible above the neckline, was the old coffee-colored cord, with the small wooden ring carved with a cross, the one Eileen had worn for 60 years. On the ring finger of her left hand, the solid gold ring with the black onyx stone still rested exactly where Eileen had placed it on her finger that October night. In the left pocket of her blouse, just above her heart, was one small thing she never let leave her. Haley's silver sparrow had been repaired. Bianca had taken it to a jeweler in Midtown for 2 full months, changing jewelers 3 times, paying with the first wages she earned as a volunteer. and then returned it to Meredith the week before in a plain brown envelope without a single word. The bird had its shape again, its wings, its head, its tail. But on the left wing there was a tiny soldered seam like a scar. Bianca had not erased that scar. She had left it there, as a reminder to herself, and Meredith understood that. Beside the reception counter sat Eileen's wheelchair. She had grown much stronger after 3 months of care at the penthouse on the 62nd floor. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her silver hair was trimmed neatly at the nape, and the skin beneath her eyes had filled out again. She was leaning toward a woman of about 60, who had just reached the desk, the scarf over the woman's head damp with snow. Eileen asked her name, then where she was from, then which soup she liked best out of the 4 choices that day. 3 questions she asked every person, every day, without tiring. In the kitchen behind the room, Rafael Cortez stood over 3 large pots. He had left Celestine in the 2nd week of November, exactly 10 days after that night. Now he was the culinary director of the entire Eileen Foundation system, responsible for 3 meals a day for 300 people. Beside him, wearing a white volunteer's apron and slicing onions, stood a 45-year-old man, Wesley Tate, who still served as chief counsel of Braxton Holdings during the weekdays, but came here every Friday afternoon for 2 hours. His wife had passed the most dangerous stage of her illness the month before. To the right of the reception desk, Bianca Whitaker was bent over, writing down names. In her hands was a brown leather notebook, the very notebook Meredith had carried with her all through those 8 months at Celestine. 2 months earlier, on Bianca's 4th Wednesday evening at the station, Meredith had slid the notebook across the desk to her without saying anything, only giving a small nod. Bianca had received it the way someone might receive a diploma. Now every day she wrote, name, approximate age, favorite soup, hometown, if they still remembered it. At the front door, Caden Wyatt leaned one shoulder against the wooden frame. He wore a black suit as always, but today he carried no gun. He was the head of security for the entire Eileen Foundation system, a job he had accepted in November when Cillian had asked him only one question: who do you want to protect for the rest of your life? He had answered within 1 second. The Sterling Tower had been rechristened O'Donnell Tower, its new brass plaque bearing a simple promise that Cillian had written himself. Here, every soul has a name. Doorman Eddie Malone had been promoted to chief of security for the entire tower, at triple his former salary, a decision Cillian had quietly signed the very morning after that night, without anyone needing to remind him. And Cillian himself, this morning, had driven his own Cadillac across the Brooklyn Bridge, alone, without an escort, parked at the corner across from the station, and walked through the snow to stand before the glass door. He didn't go in. He didn't step across the threshold. He only stood outside, wearing a black wool coat that reached his knees. No suit today, both hands tucked in the pockets, snow falling in slow flakes over his shoulders and black hair. Inside, Meredith had just finished writing down a name in her own new notebook. She lifted her head. Through the large glass window, she saw him. She smiled. Not a broad smile, not one meant to be seen from across a room, just enough for the corners of her mouth to soften upward. She raised her left hand to her chest, palm facing him. The gold ring with the black onyx stone on her ring finger caught the overhead light of the station and glimmered softly. Then she lifted her right hand and touched her left breast, exactly over the pocket of her blouse, where the silver bird lay, where the old cord with the carved wooden ring crossed her collarbone. Outside the window, Cillian raised his right hand and touched the left side of his chest, exactly over the pocket of his black wool coat, where the white silk handkerchief embroidered with the letter F still rested over his heart after 20 years. He kept his hand there for 3 seconds. The two of them faced one another through the pane of glass blurred by a thin layer of warmth from the room within. Not a word was spoken. None was needed. This was a new language now, the language of 2 people who had survived one October night together, a language only they understood. Cillian lowered his hand. He gave the faintest nod. Then he turned and walked back through the snow to his car. Caden, who had watched the whole thing from inside the doorway, opened the car door for him. He got in. The Cadillac rolled down the snow-covered Brooklyn street and merged into the traffic on Van Brunt Avenue. Meredith turned back to Eileen. The old woman was smiling gently at the woman in the headscarf. Now knowing her name, now knowing she had come from a small town in Maine, Meredith went into the kitchen, took from Raphael's hand a white porcelain bowl filled with pumpkin soup, made from a family recipe he had rewritten for the station, and carried it back out to place before the woman. Her voice was soft, the same voice she had used with Eileen 3 months earlier on the 58th floor. Eat. Don't think about anything. The woman closed her eyes. She picked up the spoon, lifted the first spoonful to her mouth. The heat from the soup fogged one lens of her old glasses. Meredith stood there and watched her eat, and there was a smile on her lips. But while she stood there, the fingers of her right hand, lightly resting on the edge of the counter, pressed her thumb into the center of her palm, into the small hollow between thumb and forefinger, an old habit, a habit she had carried since she was 23, from the day she brought her mother home from the hospital for the last time, and it had not yet disappeared. The wound inside her had not fully healed. Every night on the R train back from Brooklyn to her room at the penthouse on the 62nd floor, she still played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major through her headphones. There were still moments, brief ones, when a yellow school bus passed on the avenue, or when a 14-year-old girl laughed with her mother in the park, and the memory of Haley rushed back in a single wave. She had come very far from that October night. She had a new home now. She had a grandmother, a friend, a dream of returning to school. She had a black onyx ring and a black card with 6 handwritten words that she read again every night before sleeping. But she had not forgotten her pain, and perhaps she never would forget it completely. That was the most beautiful thing of all, because the people who know pain are the ones who understand when someone else is hurting without saying it. And that was exactly what Eileen needed from her here at this station every day, for 300 people with no home. There are bowls of soup that do not only feed the body, they feed the soul. There are old women who are not only old women, they are bridges between the past and the present. And there are strangers who were never truly meant by the universe to remain strangers to one another. They were only waiting for the right night to understand that. Meredith Holloway gave away 32 bowls of soup across 8 months. She never knew that every bowl of soup was quietly building a bridge. And on one cold, rainy October night on Park Avenue, that bridge became strong enough for her to cross, not to forget her pain, but to carry it with her and still keep walking. Never underestimate a hot meal given at the right time. Never underestimate an old woman curled up on a street corner on an October afternoon. And never underestimate the universe, because the universe is always remembering who offered kindness at the exact moment no one was looking. If tonight's story touched your heart, even a little, please take 3 seconds and press the like button on this video. 1 like from you is a spoonful of hot soup for us through the winter of making these stories. Please share this video with anyone you think needs to hear a warm story tonight. A tired friend, a sad family member, someone sitting alone in a kitchen late at night. And if you are new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon beside it, so that every week, when we tell a new story about the human heart, you will be among the first to hear it. We would truly love to hear your thoughts about Meredith, Eileen, and Cillian. At what moment did you cry? Which character did you see yourself in? If you had been standing at Bianca's reception desk that night, what would you have done differently? Please leave a comment below the video, even if it is only 1 short sentence, because every comment you leave is one more reason for us to sit down and keep telling stories like this next week. And finally, from our content team, we wish all of you who are watching this video tonight, or tomorrow morning, or on some late afternoon, good health, a gentle and joyful life, warm meals beside the people you love, and a peaceful spirit in a city that moves too fast. Goodbye for now. We will see you again in our next video.